Chapter 585. The two lines of words were embedded clearly on the wall, written in a bold and majestic manner. The moment one caught sight of the words, they could feel an aura that was above the world surging towards them, causing their hearts to shudder. Suzumo smiled. In a daze, it was as though a peerlessly beautiful woman in blood-colored robes with an indifferent expression had appeared before him, watching him silently. The words were like a face. There was only a single person who could write such domineering words. 8 years ago, before Dayu left, he remembered every single word that she said to Suzumo clearly. If you want to cultivate both immortality and demonic, you will have to experience unimaginable hardships. However, remember, these hardships will only make you stronger. There's a saying in the Abhidhamsaka Sutra of the Buddhist monasteries that I'll give you. If you want to be a dragon or elephant, you have to be a horse or a cow for all living beings. Right now, those two lines of words were engraved before Suzumo. The moment he saw those two lines of words, Suzumo's heart was filled with an uncontrollable longing. Unknowingly, 8 years had passed. During his time in Pingyang town, Dayu might have intentionally or unintentionally put him through many trials and even had his life on the line a few times. However, Dayu had never let him suffer any grievances. In Songlang mountain range, he was nearly killed by the purple-winged eagle, but Dayu killed all of them. The joyful clan cultivators relied on their numbers and cultivation realm to suppress him. Hence, they chased after him unscrupulously and Dayu destroyed the joyful clan. If she knew that Glass Palace had sent a void reversion to kill Suzumo, given Dayu's personality, it would be normal for her to kill her way into Glass Palace alone. Little Fox tilted her head at the side with a confused expression. This was the first time she had seen such a smile on Suzumo's face in the past year. He was as happy as a child. The old monk's expression was unchanged, but there was a hint of splendor in his murky eyes. Before Suzumo stepped into the hall, he was initially depressed and had lost all hope for the future. But the moment he saw these two lines of words, the dispirited aura on his body was swept away. His entire person was in high spirits, and his aura suddenly changed. It was as if he wanted to trample the heavens beneath his feet. The old monk thought to himself, impressive. Normally speaking, if one's cultivation was destroyed and they fell to the mortal world, it would be difficult for any cultivator to bear such a blow. Moreover, the road ahead was misty and there was no hope at all. Suzumo's Tao heart had already cracked and was on the verge of collapsing. Unexpectedly, these two lines of words actually directly stabilized Suzumo's Tao heart. The old monk had lived for countless years and could naturally tell that nothing could shake Suzumo's Tao heart after this ordeal. Clang! Suddenly, the sound of chains rattling could be heard in the backyard of the main hall. It was dull and powerful. The ground trembled as if an evil spirit was about to break free. The entire hall was filled with a faint baleful aura. Standing outside the main hall, Mingzhen could not help but shudder when he heard the sound of chains and glanced at the backyard with lingering fear. Little Fox shuddered and sniffed with a bewildered expression. She could sense an extremely frightening aura in the air. The owner of that aura seemed as though he could rip her to shreds at any moment. It was an indescribable fear that came from the depths of her bloodline and soul. The old monk was the only one who was expressionless, as though he could not hear the sound of chains. The sound of chains rang for a moment before silence reigned once more. Suzumo gradually woke up from his memories as well.
It had only been half an incense stick's time since he stepped into the main hall. However, after that period of time, his heart underwent a nirvanic metamorphosis and was completely reborn. Although his cultivation did not fluctuate at all, Suzumo believed that there was nothing and no one in this world that could block his path forward. Xuanyu Daoren had crushed his core formation. He had created a new path for himself. Suzumo gazed at the words on the wall for a long time before saying softly, "She was here." Yes, the old monk nodded. Even though the old monk did not state who she was, Su Zimo believed that the old monk must know. That was because no matter who it was, as long as they saw her, even if it was just a single glance, they would never forget her for the rest of their lives. The old monk had a conflicted expression as he sighed. Around 8 years ago, this female patron came here and took away something. Before she left behind a sentence from the ancient Avatamsaka Sutra of the Buddhist monasteries on this wall. I did not understand what it meant and could not help but ask. The female patron merely replied with a single sentence, waiting for the fated one. Thereafter, she left and never appeared again. Su Zimo smiled. He could imagine Dai Yu's cold and aloof expression from the old monk's simple description. That was indeed Dai Yu. She could not be bothered to explain further. The old monk continued, for the past 8 years, I did not know who the fated one was. It was only when I saw you that I understood. Me? Su Zimo was slightly stunned. Naturally, he knew that Dai Yu must have left those 2 sentences for him. However, before this, how did the old monk know that he was related to Dai Yu? As though he could sense the confusion in Su Zimo's heart, the old monk smiled gently and explained, that's because the thing that the female patron took away from here is with you, patron. Therefore, you are the fated one, patron. It was only at this moment that Su Zimo realized that he had overlooked something. Just now, the old monk mentioned that Dai Yu took away something from here. What was it that Dai Yu would travel all the way to the Dragon Burial Valley to take it away personally and even leave it with him? A thought flashed through Su Zimo's mind. Back in the ancient battlefield, when the mysterious old man of the human emperor's palace mentioned about spirit roots, he said meaningfully that there were only a few types of utmost treasures in Tianhuang mainland and Su Zimo possessed 2 of them. One of them was confirmed to be the divine phoenix bone. Could it be that the item that Dai Yu had taken from this place was another treasure? If that was the case, the old monk might have been too tactful with his words. Dai Yu did not take away the utmost treasure, she snatched it away. This female patron is extremely capable. I'm ashamed of my inferiority. The old monk's words confirmed Su Zimo's guess.
He could almost imagine how Dai Yu descended upon the Dragon Burial Valley 8 years ago and suppressed the old monk domineeringly. She took the utmost treasure and left without a second word, even leaving 2 sentences on the wall. That was indeed Dai Yu's style. Domineering, and lazy to explain. Su Zimo felt a little guilty and glanced at the old monk. Dai Yu suppressed the other party back then and even snatched away the utmost treasure. Now that he was in this place, it would be unreasonable for the old monk to not settle scores with him. At the very least, he had to retrieve the utmost treasure. Patron, don't worry, the old monk smiled gently. Since that item is with you, patron, it means that it is fated with you. I won't snatch it away. Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. This old monk seemed to be able to see through his thoughts. Right from the beginning, he did not say much. However, the old monk was able to respond to every single thought in his mind. His methods were truly unfathomable.
Chapter 586. Suddenly, Su Zimo recalled an ancient text he read in the sutra chamber a few months ago. In the ancient books, there was a record of this magical ability. It was called telepathy. It was said that those who cultivated mind reading would be able to sense the thoughts of others without talking or touching. It was extremely mysterious. At its peak, one could even know the thoughts of all living beings in the 6 realms with a single thought. It was extremely terrifying. The old monk's cultivation was unfathomable and Su Zimo estimated that he was at least a Dharma Dao Jun. Or perhaps, he was even scarier. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo asked, what exactly is that utmost treasure? Just now, you said that the utmost treasure is with me, but why haven't I sensed it before? The old monk's gaze was wise as he said slowly, there are 3 sacred trees in the Buddhist monasteries. The first is the Bodhi tree, the second is the Ashoka tree, and the third is the sorrow tree. These three holy trees are not in this world. They grow in the pure land of bliss. Paradise? A look of confusion flashed through Suzumo's eyes. The old monk did not explain and merely smiled faintly before continuing. There are Ashoka flowers on the Ashoka tree. In the ancient era, a Ashoka flower landed in Tianhuang mainland and was obtained by the founder master of Fahua Monastery. It was revered as a sacred item of the Buddhist monasteries and was passed down to this day until that female patron took it away. The old monk's words indirectly revealed a piece of information. This old temple was related to Fahua Monastery 10,000 years ago. Ashoka flower? Suzumo recalled carefully, but he could not recall Daiyu giving him anything like a flower. The old monk said, "Patron, you're someone without a spirit root." Yes, Suzumo nodded calmly. Indeed, he was born with an incomplete spirit root and only started cultivating after he met Daiyu. Before Daiyu left, she even helped him plant a spirit root that was not weaker than a heaven spirit root while he was unconscious. As though he could read Suzumo's mind, the old monk shook his head. Spirit roots are illusory and innate. If it exists, it exists. If it doesn't, it doesn't. There's no such thing as planting a spirit root. Suzumo frowned slightly. He didn't understand what the old monk meant. Since there was no such thing as planting a spiritual root, then what was up with his spiritual root? If he didn't have a spirit root, how did he cultivate? All of a sudden, some scenes flashed through Suzumo's mind. It seemed that his spiritual root was indeed different from the others. The most obvious was the speed of cultivation. His speed of condensing chi had even surpassed cultivators with heavenly spirit roots. Furthermore, the quality of his spiritual energy was extremely pure, far superior to that of cultivators with heavenly spiritual roots of the same level. There was another strange thing. When he first became Misty Peak's disciple, when he passed through the spirit testing stone door, he clearly felt a great resistance from the stone door. That spirit testing stone door would only block cultivators with no spirit roots, pseudo-spirit roots, and ordinary spirit roots. At that time, Suzumo felt indignant and used his powerful brute force to break through the barrier formed by the stone door and rushed over. Then, the spirit-testing stone door shattered. Could it be? A terrifying thought flashed through Suzumo's mind. The old monk nodded. Patron, in reality, you don't have a spirit root right from the beginning. Suzumo's heart skipped a beat. The old monk continued, however, that female patron took away the Saraka flower and sealed that utmost treasure of the Buddhist monasteries in your dantian to replace the role of the spirit root. Suzumo's mouth was agape. All of a sudden, some of his doubts in the past seemed to be explained. It was no wonder why Daiyu had a strange expression when she said that she planted a spirit root for him. Furthermore, according to what Daiyu said back then. Today, it seemed like there was more to it. Daiyu said that she planted a spirit root for him that was not inferior to a heaven spirit root. However, she did not say that she planted a heaven spirit root for him directly. The old monk said, in reality, the reason why you can sense spirit energy and cultivate isn't because of your spirit root. It's because there's an utmost treasure of the Buddhist monasteries from the pure land in your dantian. The information behind that was way too huge and had a huge impact on Suzumo. His heart was in a mess as he frowned and asked, then why does the spirit energy I cultivate have a fire attribute? That's because the Saraka flower, also known as the flame flower, is shaped like flames when it blooms and is extremely sensitive to fire attributes spirit energy in the surroundings. Everything that did not make sense made sense instantly. With the two utmost treasures, the divine phoenix bone and Saraka flower, coupled with their sensitivity to fire, it was only logical that Suzumo's cultivation speed was shocking. After being refined by the two utmost treasures, spirit energy would naturally be much purer and richer. Although the spirit testing door had existed for thousands of years, there was no way it could withstand the impact of the two utmost treasures. The old monk smiled. Patron, haven't you realized that you've already been able to understand some of the ancient sutras of the Buddhist monasteries in the past year and have gained some insights? Su Zimo nodded. Back when he was studying in Pingyang town, he had come into contact with Buddhist sutras. At that time, those Buddhist sutras were like heavenly books that were difficult to understand. He could not understand a single word and merely felt dazzled. In less than an hour, he tossed those sutras aside. The strange thing was that after so many years, Su Zimo was shocked to discover that he could understand more than half of those Buddhist sutras when he picked them up in the sutra chamber at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. The old monk's voice sounded, if a person doesn't have the root of wisdom, they won't be able to comprehend the profoundness of Buddhist sutras and won't be able to cultivate Buddhism. In fact, they won't even be able to read them. However, you're different, Su Zimo was enlightened. The Saraka flower was a sacred item of the Buddhist monasteries. It existed in Su Zimo's dantian. Not only did it replace the use of a spirit root, it even gave him a form of wisdom that was close to the root of wisdom. That was what Dai Yu had left for him. It was not a simple spirit root. It was only at this moment that Su Zimo realized Dai Yu's intentions. Be it the Saraka flower or the divine phoenix bone, they were utmost treasures of Tianhuang mainland. Before Dai Yu left, she said that she had left him 3 items. Now that he knew of 2 of them, he did not know what the last item was. Su Zimo asked, "Where is this flower now?" "It's still in your dantian. However, you haven't cultivated to the realm of inner vision and can't see it yet," the old monk replied. Pausing for a moment, the old monk continued, "Just now, I've said that since ancient times, no one has been able to cultivate anew after their cultivation was crippled. That's true. I don't know how to resolve your calamity as well. However, this female patron exhausted all her effort to seal the Saraka flower in your dantian and left behind 2 lines of words here. I think there must be a deeper meaning to it." Su Zimo nodded. Actually, when he saw the 2 lines of words left behind by Dai Yu, Su Zimo had already decided that he would cultivate in peace at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley from now on. If one wanted to be a dragon or elephant, one had to be a cow or a horse or a cow for all living beings. This was his suffering. He had to choose to endure it. One day, Manyo would transform into a dragon and elephant that would tear through the horizons and soar through the 9 heavens, returning to the mortal realm and shocking all living beings. Chapter 587. Pointing to the side, the old monk said, "The sutra chamber over there contains the manuals of Fahua and Daming monasteries. Take a look and you might be able to gain something." Su Zimo nodded. Fahua and Daming monasteries were top-tier factions that were on par with the current 9 immortal sects, 7 fiend sects and other super sects. It was clear how deep their foundations were. However, it was a pity that the calamity 10,000 years ago had left the 2 super sects with this shabby and dilapidated ancient temple, isolated from the rest of the world. The entire cultivation world probably did not know that such an old temple existed at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. Although the old monk spoke casually, Su Zimo knew that many of those ancient sutras were secrets of Fahua and Daming monasteries. For example, the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra was thought to be lost by the outside world. Who would have thought that the sutra that was known as the #1 secret skill of the core formation would be at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley? It was in the hands of a young novice monk who could read it at any time. It was not hard to imagine that the impact of the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra's appearance would be much more terrifying than the appearance of the vermilion fruit. At that time, there would definitely be a bloodbath. The paragons of the North region would not be the only ones involved. All the paragons of Tianhuang mainland would be tempted and go crazy for it. However, there was more than one sutra like the mystic Dharmic Lotus Sutra. There were many more in the sutra chamber. That seemingly simple and shabby library was, in fact, a huge treasure trove. It was equivalent to the legacies of 2 super sects being placed before Su Zimo. The only pity was that his cultivation was crippled and he could not gather qi. If he could gather qi, he would not only possess the legacies of the immortal and fiend sects, he would also possess the legacy of the Buddhist monasteries. Just as Su Zimo was pondering, the old monk seemed to have thought of something and his expression turned emotional. The old monk sighed. After the catastrophe back then, Fahua and Daming monasteries no longer existed and were buried by time. My old friends have either left or dispersed. Now, I'm the only one left. There was a heart-wrenching loneliness in the old monk's tone. Su Zimo could not help but ask, "Senior, are you and fellow Taoist Mingzhen the only ones in this old temple?" The old monk was silent for a moment before nodding. "Just the two of us." Clang! Just as he finished speaking, the sound of chains suddenly rang out from the backyard of the main hall. It was heavy and powerful, as if something was constantly struggling. Su Zimo's heart trembled. Startled, the little fox followed Su Zimo's arm and burrowed into his chest to hide. The old monk's expression did not change. His eyes were like an ancient well, without the slightest fluctuation. It was as if he had turned a deaf ear to the sound of chains in the backyard. Seeing how calm the old monk was, Su Zimo gradually relaxed. However, he was really curious about what the sound of chains in the backyard of the main hall was. Why would Mingzhen be so fearful and avoid it? The old monk interrupted Su Zimo's thoughts and suddenly asked, "I can sense a hint of Buddhist aura around you. That's not produced by the Saraka flower. Have you cultivated Buddhist techniques before?" Buddhist techniques? Could it be? Su Zimo froze for a moment before a look of realization flashed through his eyes. He gathered qi slowly and made use of the moment spirit qi surged into his body to open his storage bag and retrieve a Buddha bead the size of a longan. The Buddha bead was extremely ancient. Although it was made of wood, it did not show any signs of decay and the patterns carved on it were clearly visible. This Buddha bead was something that he had picked up by accident when he was trapped in the stone coffin with Demonist Ji back then. Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Through this Buddha bead, I've gained control of a powerful spirit art known as the Fiend Suppression Seal." If he had ever cultivated anything from the Buddhist monasteries, it would be the Fiend Suppression Seal. The moment he took out the Buddha bead, Su Zimo finally understood something. Why was he able to comprehend the powerful Fiend Suppression Seal with just a single Buddha bead? It wasn't because of his shocking talent. It was because of the existence of the sacred item of the Buddhist monasteries, the Saraka flower, that he possessed the pure root of wisdom of Buddhism. Heis! The moment he caught sight of the Buddha bead, the old monk sighed gently with a rare ripple in his emotions. It was clear that the old monk recognized the origin of the Buddha bead. The old monk said, "Actually, the Fiend Suppression Seal is not a spirit art. It's a Dharmic art of Daming Monastery." Dharmic art. Su Zimo knew that one could only channel Dharmic powers and release Dharmic arts after advancing to nascent soul realm and cultivating an essence spirit. Since the Fiend Suppression Seal was a Dharmic art, how could he channel spirit energy and release it in the form of a spirit art? It's no wonder why the Saraka flower is a sacred item of the Buddhist monasteries, the old monk's words enlightened Su Zimo. The Saraka flower was probably the only one that possessed such miraculous powers. Su Zimo recalled everything that happened back then and said, "This Buddha bead was discovered in a stone coffin. In that stone coffin, there was a skeleton that came back to life. It was extremely terrifying and I was only able to escape by luck." After thinking for a moment, Su Zimo continued, "That skeleton seemed to be from the fiend sections." "There's no mistake," the old monk said, "the owner of this Buddha bead is Monk Daming, the titular disciple of Daming Monastery. Back then, he was a peerless expert whose reputation shook the world." Titular disciple? This was the second time Su Zimo had heard of that title. The first titular disciple was Shura Yenbeichen. The second was the current Monk Daming. The old monk explained, "In the various super sects of Tianhuang mainland, there will only be one titular disciple. Every single titular disciple is the paragon of the sect with the greatest potential, the most dazzling battle results and the most terrifying combat strength. The cultivation realms of titular disciples are not fixed. However, they have countless trump cards and the most basic ability is to kill above their level. Generally speaking, one is only qualified to become a titular disciple after advancing to the void reversion realm. At that point, Su Zimo understood. In other words, titular disciples were the strongest among the paragons of the various super sects. The old monk continued, the so-called titular disciples are the Tao titles that are unique to the sect bestowed by the patriarch. For example, the titular disciples of Fahua Monastery are bestowed with the Tao title of Fahua. The titular disciples of Daming Monastery are bestowed with the Tao title of Daming and are extremely easy to identify. The titular disciples are a little far away from you. You just have to remember that if you encounter titular disciples of super sects in the future, you have to be careful and not get into conflict easily. Su Zimo nodded. The old monk thought for a moment and said, back then, a fiend appeared in Shura sect and created the Blood Refinement Fiend Sutra. Killing became his second nature and wherever he passed, the blood of all living beings would be devoured cleanly. At that point, Su Zimo realized that there was a high chance that the skeleton was the fiend of Shura sect back then. The old monk continued, Monk Daming could not bear to see the suffering of the masses and left the sect to kill that fiend. Both sides fought 3 rounds. Although the fiend of Shura sect was disadvantaged, it was difficult to determine the victor. In the 4th battle, just now, the victor was decided. It was said that the battle was earth-shattering and the sun and moon changed colors. Even the ground cracked and both sides gave it their all. Chapter 588. What happened after that? Su Zimo asked instinctively. The old monk shook his head. Later on, there were many rumors. Some said that the fiend of Shura sect was killed and Monk Daming was severely injured and died not long after. There are also people who say that both sides suffered great losses, and both of them perished. In any case, the final outcome was that the 2 of them went missing. No one knew if they were alive or dead and their whereabouts were unknown. They were never seen again. There was a hint of sorrow in the old monk's tone. From the looks of it, Monk Daming was most likely doomed in that battle back then. That fiend of Shura sect nearly came back to life with the power of his bloodline. The old monk took the Buddha beads from Su Zimo's hands and rubbed them gently between his fingers. A moment later, the old monk seemed to have discovered something and exclaimed softly. What is it? Su Zimo asked hurriedly. Nothing, the old monk shook his head. Actually, this is a connate dermic weapon of Daming Monastery known as the Mingwang Prayer Beads. It's made up of 6 Buddha beads. The Mingwang Prayer Beads are made from the core of the soul-nourishing tree, an immortal wood from Tianhuang mainland. There are 6 dermic seals of Daming Monastery etched on them. The Buddha beads that you have is only one of them. The Mingwang Prayer Beads were originally worn by Monk Daming. The battle back then was way too tragic and the Mingwang Prayer Beads were broken and the 6 Buddha beads were scattered everywhere. At that point, the old monk extended his skinny finger and tapped his glabella gently. A bright light shone on his glabella. Immediately after, the old monk's glabella opened up and spat out 3 Buddha beads the size of longans. They were identical to the ones Su Zimo had. However, if one focused their attention, they would realize that the patterns etched on each of the Buddha beads were different. The old monk said, after that battle, the monks of Daming Monastery searched for a long time and only managed to find 3 Buddha beads. Including the one you have, there are 2 more that are lost outside. The Daming Temple has a supreme technique that protects the temple, called the Daming True Scripture. The sutra is divided into 2 parts. The first part is called the Ming Mantra, also known as the 6 words the Ming Mantra. It is a musical technique. When he heard that, Su Zimo could not help but recall the 6 strange syllables that Mingzhen chanted outside the old temple. Those 6 syllables contained a mysterious force that was difficult to fathom. The old monk's voice continued, the lower part is the Daming Dharmapala. There are 6 of them and they are all imprinted on this string of Mingwang prayer beads. The demon vanquishing seal that you have learned is one of them. The seals on the 3 prayer beads in my hand are the demon subduing seal, the immortal trap seal, and the immovable foundation seal. Su Zimo nodded secretly. If the fiend suppression seal was already this powerful, the demon subduing seal, immortal trap seal and immovable foundation seal would definitely not be weak. The old monk could tell what Su Zimo was thinking and could not help but chuckle. Actually, of the 6 dermic seals, these 4 are the weakest. Ah! Su Zimo was stunned. And this was only the weakest one? The old monk nodded. There's no need to elaborate on the immovable foundation seal. It's a defensive dermic seal. As for the demon vanquishing seal, the demon subduing seal and the immortal trap seal, you can tell from their names that they have a chance of survival. None of the demon subduing, trap seals had any killing intent. From the moment they were created, the 3 dermic seals contained the compassion and magnanimity of the Buddhist monasteries. The old monk said, among the 6 dermic seals, the ones that are truly powerful and can be considered as killing dermic seals are the last 2 that have been lost, the Great Vajrawheel seal and Great Meru seal. The moment the 2 dermic seals were mentioned, they exuded a terrifying pressure that caused one's heart to shudder. The Daming mantra has 6 syllables that correspond to the 6 dermic seals. When you cultivate it together with the Daming mantra, you'll gain a deeper level of understanding and its power will be maximized as well. The cultivation technique of the Daming mantra is in the sutra chamber. You can take a look at it. Su Zimo was enlightened. So, his demon vanquishing seal had yet to unleash its true power. If it was released together with the Daming mantra, its power would be even more terrifying. As the old and young man chatted, the skies turned dark unknowingly. In the meantime, the sound of chains could be heard from the backyard of the grand hall. When it saw that no one was paying attention, it went silent once more. Right from the beginning, the old monk did not explain anything, as though he was already used to it. Gradually, the skies turned dark. Su Zimo's clothes moved at his chest. The little fox who had slept soundly for the entire day rubbed her sleepy eyes and popped her head out. Her gaze was still a little dazed and she was not fully awake. She rested her tiny paws on Su Zimo's chest and looked at the old monk before her in a daze. Blinking her eyes, she looked adorable. The old monk smiled. Gradually, the little fox snapped out of her daze and lowered her head in embarrassment. The old monk looked at Su Zimo deeply. This little fox, you have to take good care of her. Don't let her suffer, of course, Su Zimo replied. Immediately after, he felt that something was amiss. Just now, the old monk did not seem to have finished his sentence and was hesitant. Just as Su Zimo was about to ask, the old monk changed the topic and asked, "Patron, are you willing to join the Buddhist monasteries?" Su Zimo froze for a moment. The old monk's question was extremely sudden and he had never thought about it. The old monk continued, "Patron, don't worry. There won't be too many restrictions for you if you join the Buddhist monasteries. You can leave at any time you wish and I won't stop you." Although he had not cultivated mind reading, Su Zimo suddenly understood the old monk's intentions when he saw the latter's hopeful gaze. The old monk had guarded this old temple at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley for more than 10,000 years, protecting the legacy of Fahua and Daming monasteries for more than 10,000 years. He hoped that he could preserve a spark for those 2 sects. The old monk must have sensed that his lifespan was approaching, that was why he made such a request. All right. Su Zimo nodded and agreed. The old monk nodded in gratification and stroked Su Zimo's head gently with a shaving knife between his fingers. It was accompanied by a cool breeze. Black hair fell. The old monk's voice sounded in Su Zimo's ears, "From this day forth, your Buddhist monastic title will be Ming Xian." In reality, even if he did not agree, Su Zimo could have browsed through the ancient sutras in the sutra chamber as he wished. However, he could not get over it. Furthermore, he had fallen to the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and his cultivation was crippled. He had to start all over again. Cutting off the black hair on his head was a symbol of cutting off the past, temporarily abandoning Su Zimo's identity and forgetting his past glory. From this day forth, he would cultivate wholeheartedly at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and await the moment he rose once more. The old monk withdrew a strand of almost transparent silk from his storage bag and strung the 4 Buddha beads in his hands together, making a string of prayer beads once more. Although the Mingwang prayer beads are missing 2 Buddha beads, they have some uses as well. They can block the essence spirits of Jinying Jinjuan and void reversions from probing. Take it as a gift for you to acknowledge me as your master. Su Zimo pressed his palms together and bowed deeply. That gift was way too valuable. Although it was missing 2 Buddha beads, it was a connate dermic weapon in the past after all. Notwithstanding the power of the Mingwang prayer beads, the 4 dermic seals on them were enough to drive countless cultivators crazy. Furthermore, blocking the essence spirit meant that many of Su Zimo's secrets would not be discovered. The situation where he was forced to reveal his true appearance by the demon-revealing mirror would never happen again. For Su Zimo, that was an irreplaceable gift. Chapter 589. The night was hazy. It was silent in the courtyard of the old temple. In the sparkling surface of the ancient well, a bright full moon was reflected. Before long, a monk was reflected in the water. He did not look old and was in his 20s. His features were refined and his eyes were even clearer than the water in the well. Su Zimo looked at his reflection in the water and smiled gently. Ming Xian, do you want me to see my true nature and go straight to my heart? Su Zimo murmured softly. At that moment, the old monk was nowhere to be found and Ming Zhen was already asleep. Frogs croaked and cicadas chirped in his ears. The little fox was sprawled beside the well, sleeping soundly. Suddenly, Su Zimo felt an incomparable sense of serenity in his heart. At the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley that was isolated from the world, Su Zimo's state of mind received an unprecedented baptism. He had been fighting for the past 8 years. But now, he had finally come to a stop. This was more like a form of settling down, a return to simplicity. Looking at the full moon above his head, Su Zimo could not help but recall that night 8 years ago. Wearing a blood-red robe, Dai Yu stood beneath the falling peach blossoms and bathed in the moonlight, asking softly, "Do you want to cultivate?" For the past 8 years, Su Zimo had been cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness every night. But now that his inner core was shattered and he did not have enough energy to replenish it, the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness had no choice but to stop. Su Zimo was truly not used to it. He felt an emptiness in his heart. Right then, a voice that was filled with mockery sounded in Su Zimo's ears. "Lad, are you thinking about how to repair your inner core?" He. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. The voice appeared without warning and was extremely unfamiliar. It did not belong to the old monk or Ming Zhen. Instinctively, Su Zimo looked at the little fox at the side. The little fox was still sleeping soundly and it was clear that she did not hear the voice. He was the only one who could hear the voice that suddenly appeared. With a grim expression, Su Zimo looked around, prepared to warn the old monk and young monk at any moment. Ha, little doll, stop looking for me. You can't see me." The voice sounded again, erratic and difficult to determine the direction. It seemed to be hiding in a corner and laughing at Su Zimo. This time, Su Zimo calmed down and sneered inwardly. This person was hiding in the dark, pretending to be mysterious. As long as he ignored him, this person would definitely be the first to lose his patience. "Kid, I have a way to help you repair your inner core. If you want to know, come to the backyard of this hall." As expected, the owner of the voice had revealed his intentions. The backyard of the main hall. Su Zimo frowned slightly. Before this, the sound of heavy chains would occasionally ring out from the backyard of the main hall, as if something was trapped there, and it was rather irritable. Strange. A look of confusion flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as he lamented to himself. Master once said that he and Ming Zhen were clearly the only ones in this old temple. This person in the backyard. Su Zimo's expression changed as he suddenly thought of a possibility. There was a high chance that the existence in the backyard was not human, but a malevolent ghost. It was similar to the white-bloused woman he met outside the old temple. That was the reason why the old monk said that he and Ming Zhen were the only ones in the old temple. That was because the existence in the backyard was not human at all. For Ming Zhen and the old monk to be so fearful without mentioning anything, this malevolent ghost must have a powerful background and definitely not weak. Do you want to repair your inner core or not? Why are you being so wishy-washy? Hurry and come to the backyard to meet me. The malevolent ghost's voice sounded once more, seemingly a little impatient. Naturally, Su Zimo wanted to repair his inner core. However, he truly could not trust a malevolent ghost. Furthermore, Ming Zhen had warned him repeatedly not to go to the backyard of the main hall. Kid, you're truly as timid as a mouse. Do you think I'll harm you? Look at how useless you are. You're far from what I was back then. You can't even compare. Back then, I was fearless and roamed the world unhindered. Who would dare to stop me? Kid, are you coming or not? The malevolent ghost's tone turned weaker. Su Zimo closed his eyes and rested, unmoved the entire time. After a moment of silence, the malevolent ghost suddenly said, "Do you want to know what that blood-robed woman did when she came here 8 years ago?" Hee, I saw everything back then. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he opened his eyes. The blood-robed woman that the malevolent ghost was referring to was clearly Dayu. As though it sensed Su Zimo's emotions, the malevolent ghost said smugly, "If you want to know, come to the backyard of the main hall. I'll be waiting for you there, hee. Su Zimo gripped his fists and took a deep breath. Finally, he could not hold it in and stood up, walking towards the back of the main hall. He did not want to miss out on any news regarding Dayu. It did not matter if it was true or not. Turning around the quaint grand hall, Su Zimo arrived at the backyard and stopped in his tracks. Instinctively, Su Zimo looked over and could not help but open his mouth slightly with deep shock in his eyes. The backyard of the main hall was an extremely majestic mausoleum forest with boundless tombstones. One after another, tall tombstones stood upright with clear words etched on them. Tomb of Dao Lord Tian Dao of Fahua Monastery. Tomb of Dao Lord Fu Yen of Daming Monastery. Tomb of Mighty Figure Yu Zhe of Fahua Monastery. Tomb of Mighty Figure Su Yun of Daming Monastery. Tomb of Mighty Figure Han Fei of the Empire's General. At a glance, there were densely packed tombstones standing tall above the tomb. The mausoleum forest was filled with an inexplicable sense of tragedy. At the very least, the ones buried here were Dharma Dao Jun. In fact, Su Zimo even caught sight of quite a number of tombstones of conjoint body mighty figures. Su Zimo focused his gaze on another tombstone. Tomb of Patriarch Hong Guang of Daming Monastery. The tomb of a Mahayana patriarch. Mahayana patriarchs were almost peak experts of Tianhuang mainland. To think that they would be buried in this mausoleum. As Su Zimo lamented, his gaze instinctively landed at the center of the mausoleum. There was only an inconspicuous grave there. If one did not pay attention, they would only think that it was a small mound that protruded slightly. However, that small mound seemed to be looking down on the entire mausoleum. There were no other tombstones within 100 meters of it, there was only that small mound. Above the grave, there was a wooden board that was crooked. There were only 2 words written on the wooden board. Dharma Emperor. Those 2 words seemed to possess a mysterious power. Su Zimo's expression changed starkly and he felt his chest tighten as he staggered a few steps back uncontrollably. The tomb of an emperor. A sentence echoed in Su Zimo's mind and grew louder and louder. 10,000 years ago, emperors bled beneath this rift valley and patriarchs died, burying divine dragons, it was an ominous place. All of this was real. The calamity 10,000 years ago was unexpectedly so tragic that an emperor-level figure fell here. Clang! Clang! The sound of heavy chains could be heard. Behind the countless tombstones, a tall figure stood up slowly under the hazy moonlight. His aura was torrential, as though he wanted to smash a hole through the firmaments above his head. Chapter 590. It was a burly man with disheveled hair and tattered clothes. The burly man had a head of scarlet hair that resembled burning flames. His face was rough and his gaze was like a torch. He glared at Su Zimo's face and his lips curled into a sinister smile. Thick, rusty chains coiled around the burly man's arms, legs, torso and neck. As the burly man stood up, a series of clanking sounds rang out from the chains. The most frightening thing was that two of the chains pierced through the burly man's shoulder blades. The moonlight was pale. Graves were everywhere and there were many tombstones. The fact that such a burly man with a malevolent aura was standing in this cemetery further proved Su Zimo's initial guess. This was an extremely frightening malevolent ghost. The burly man's gaze circled Su Zimo a couple of times and the glint in his eyes intensified, as though he had discovered something new. Finally, the burly man leaned forward and sniffed with an increasingly satisfied expression before bursting into laughter. Gaga gaga. The laughter echoed in the silent and gloomy mausoleum, sending chills down one's spine. Su Zimo could see clearly that the other end of the chains on the burly man's body was embedded deep into the ground, trapping the burly man in the center of the cemetery. As long as the burly man moved slightly, the chains around him would tighten. Su Zimo was relieved. Although the malevolent ghost was frightening, there was nothing he could do as long as he did not approach. Kid, you're too timid. Why are you hiding so far away? The burly man grinned. Don't worry, come over boldly. It's not like I'm going to eat you. Su Zimo sneered. He had been in the cultivation world for 8 years and had been through a lot. The burly man's clumsy method of goading him was truly unpresentable. If he were to walk over, it would be against his will. Red-headed ghost, if you have anything to say, say it here. I can hear you. Su Zimo's tone was calm and his expression was as usual. Red-headed ghost? The burly man's eyes widened and his tone changed, turning murderous. Kid, you're calling me a red-headed ghost? A ferocious glint flashed in the large man's eyes. Su Zimo curled his lips and sneered fearlessly, stop showing your teeth. You can't even move. Who are you trying to scare? He, the burly man grinded his teeth and smiled maliciously. Su Zimo asked, red-headed ghost, I don't have time to chit-chat with you. What do you know about the blood-robed woman from 8 years ago? At the mention of the blood-robed woman, the burly man's expression changed slightly. A trace of fear flashed through the depths of his eyes. Immediately after, the burly man revealed a gloating expression. Ga. The burly man grinned and said, that woman back then was really powerful. In just one exchange, the old bald donkey's silent meditation and motionless meditation that he had painstakingly cultivated were all broken. Ha 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 ha. I'm dying of laughter. In the past year, Su Zimo had read some scriptures in the Sutra Depository and had some understanding of silent meditation and motionless meditation. In the Buddhist sects, there were monks who would cultivate all sorts of Zen techniques. It was equivalent to a secret technique to raise their cultivation realm. The harsher the requirements of the Zen techniques, the more their cultivation realm would increase. For example, the silent meditation of the Buddhist sects was also known as silence or forbidden speech. Simply put, it meant that one could not speak. Buddhists believed that the reincarnation of all living beings was caused by the 3 karmas of the body, mouth and mind. Silent meditation was used to reduce one's mouth karma so that one's cultivation realm could advance. Motionless meditation did not refer to the body being motionless, but the mind. One must not use their mind recklessly and reduce their mind karma. Either of these two dhyana techniques was extremely difficult to cultivate. Su Zimo had not expected that the old monk of the ancient temple would choose to cultivate two Zen techniques at the same time. More than that, he had not expected that Dai Yu would be able to break both of the old monk's Zen techniques. The burly man continued, back then, when that woman arrived here, she barged into the Great Strength's Hall without a second word. She took the Saraka flower, a sacred item of the Buddhist sects, and turned to leave. That old bald donkey was naturally unwilling and wanted to stop her. In the end, he was sent flying with a single slap from that woman. Ha! At that point, the burly man seemed to recall what happened back then and could not help but roar in laughter as the chains on his body rumbled. If not for the restraints of the chains, the burly man would have been jumping in joy. Su Zimo was sweating profusely. Dai Yu was way too ferocious, the burly man continued. That old bald donkey was stunned by that slap and forgot about his silent meditation for a moment. When he saw that the woman was about to leave, he got up from the ground and said, "Female patron, please hold on, ha 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 ha." Su Zimo looked a little embarrassed. He wanted to laugh as well. But now that he had joined the Buddhist sects, the old monk could be considered as his master. However, he could not laugh. Therefore, he could only stand on the spot and endure it with pursed lips. His face was flushed red and it was tough to hold it in. When the burly man talked about what happened 8 years ago, he was really eloquent, vivid, and incessant. Su Zimo listened quietly at the side. It was as though he could see the scenes from back then. As he spoke, the burly man lamented and sighed. "It's all thanks to that woman. Otherwise, At that point, the burly man suddenly paused and stopped talking. Su Zimo frowned. It was clear that the burly man was hiding something and did not say anything. Su Zimo was about to ask when the burly man changed the topic and talked about how glorious, strong and invincible he was in the past. The burly man took an entire hour just to talk about his first battle after leaving the sect. He was so excited that his saliva flew everywhere. He was not done yet. To think that this red-headed ghost is such a chatterbox. Su Zimo was getting increasingly impatient. Apart from everything about Dai Yu, he was not interested in anything else the burly man said. Su Zimo could not help but interrupt. "Red-headed ghost, you said that you have a way to help me recover my inner core?" "That's right." The burly man nodded before glaring at Su Zimo. "Don't interrupt me. Wait for me to finish. What's the rush? I'm not interested." Su Zimo sneered and turned to leave. Clang! Suddenly, the sound of chains rattling could be heard behind him. This time round, the sound was a little strange. Su Zimo turned back instinctively. Su Zimo was scared out of his wits with that single glance. The spot where the burly man was initially chained was now empty. The only thing left were chains that laid silently on the ground. Su Zimo was completely stunned. Right then, he suddenly felt a shadow flash past his head. Thereafter, the muscles on his neck tightened and he was lifted up by a strong hand. The scariest thing was that he could not move at all. Thereafter, the burly man's voice sounded. "Let me tell you, those broken chains are just for show. Do you really think that a few pieces of scrap metal can trap me? Who am I? Back then, I've been cooped up at the bottom of this valley for so long. Now that I finally have someone to talk to, where do you think you're going?" Initially, there was a little monk who was rather nice. Initially, he often came to accompany me. Later on, for some reason, he never appeared again. Su Zimo felt as though his head was about to explode, as though countless wasps were buzzing around him. He finally understood why Ming Zhen was so terrified and reminded him repeatedly not to come to the backyard of the Grand Hall. At the same time, in the sutra chamber, Ming Zhen put his palms together with a sympathetic expression and sighed. "Junior brother Ming Xian, good luck to you." Chapter 591. Su Zimo was lifted in the palm of the burly man like a weak chick that could not resist at all. Although his cultivation was crippled, his physique and bloodline power were still present. However, he could not move at all when the burly man gripped his neck with 5 strong fingers and could only watch helplessly as he was carried into the depths of the cemetery. How could this be? Those chains can't restrain the red-headed ghost. Since they can't restrain him, why is the red-headed ghost still staying obediently in the cemetery? Does Master know about this? What's his relationship with the red-headed ghost? Instantly, countless questions surged through Su Zimo's mind and his mind was in a mess. Furthermore, the red-headed ghost was chattering endlessly in his ears about unimportant matters. Su Zimo felt like his head was about to explode. Bang! Su Zimo was thrown to the ground and was about to leap up when there was a series of clanging sounds. A thick chain had already coiled around his body. Boom! Su Zimo channeled the power of his bloodline and struggled with all his might. There was no movement. Although the chain looked rusty, it was unusually tough and could not be broken free at all. His power of bloodline was like a stone sinking into the ocean, there was no reaction from the chain at all. A cold glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as a series of crackling sounds came from within his body. His tendons and bones rang at the same time as his entire body shrank. Tendons transformation and bones contraction. Since he could not shake the chain head-on, Su Zimo changed his mind and intended to shrink his body to escape. Only the heavens knew what the burly man's intentions were for capturing him. Even if the burly man did not have any ill intentions, Su Zimo could not withstand the burly man's incessant chatter. Unexpectedly, the moment Su Zimo's body shrank, the chains on his body shrank as well and locked his body tightly without any gaps to escape. Gaga gaga. The burly man sat on the ground with a mocking look in his eyes. He grinned and said, "This broken thing can't lock me, but it's too easy to lock you up. You'd better save your strength." Su Zimo tried again, but he was unable to break free from the chains. He could only give up and frown at the large man. When he got closer, Su Zimo realized that there wasn't much flesh on the burly man's body. He was practically just skin and bones. However, the man's skeleton was extremely large, and his bones were also incomparably thick and solid. This made his body appear tall and sturdy, and his every movement was filled with explosive power. The burly man was emitting an indescribable aura, as if he had come from the depths of the ancient wilderness. He was extremely dangerous. Inadvertently, Su Zimo felt his heart palpitate. Su Zimo had no idea what this red-headed ghost's background was. The only thing he knew was that the red-headed ghost was a chatterbox. God knows how long he had been holding it in, blabbering on and on without stopping. "Little doll, you don't know how much I've suffered. This valley is isolated from the world. Other than me, there's only that old bald donkey left. In the end, that guy switched to silent meditation. No matter what I say to him, that old bald donkey doesn't react at all. Tell me, how torturous it has been for me after so many years." At that point, the burly man was agitated and grit his teeth. His massive hands were clenched into fists as he pounded the ground. The tombstone forest shook and the entire cemetery trembled. Su Zimo could not help but ask, "Why are there 2 of you? There's even a novice monk with you." The moment he said that, Su Zimo regretted it. Indeed, when the burly man saw that Su Zimo had a response, he was even more excited. His eyes shone as he sat down in front of Su Zimo. "I'm so pissed at the mention of that little bald donkey. That little bald donkey fell from above 8 years ago. At the start, he was pretty good and obedient. He would come to the backyard every day to bring me food and chat with me, but in less than half a year, that little bald donkey stopped coming. How despicable." The burly man was aggrieved and grumbled. Su Zimo lamented internally, "Senior brother Ming Zhen is truly someone with great perseverance to be able to hold on for half a year. Little monk, you can't learn from those 2 bald donkeys. You'll definitely benefit from chatting with me." Su Zimo only felt dizzy and could not be bothered about benefits at that moment. If not for the shackles, he would have fled long ago and never stepped into the backyard again. Gradually, the sky turned bright in the east. Just like that, the night passed amidst the incessant chatter of the burly man. The burly man lamented reluctantly, "Time sure flies. I've only said a little." The burly man turned around and looked at Su Zimo. Instantly, he was shocked as he asked in shock, "Little monk, why do you have dark eye circles? Why are there so many blood vessels in your eyes? You don't look too good. It's a little green. Are you poisoned? Hey, the muscles on your face are twitching. Are you having a cramp?" Su Zimo was flustered and rolled his eyes, nearly fainting. Piak! The burly man slapped his forehead in realization. "I've got it. Little monk, did you not rest well last night?" Rest. Su Zimo resisted the urge to send the burly man flying with a punch and gritted his teeth repeatedly, spitting out 2 words. He would rather fight the paragons of the North region for 3 days and 3 nights than listen to another word from the burly man. This red-headed ghost was simply a fiendish existence. Look. Little monk, you're way too hot-tempered. Why are your eyes so wide open? What grievances do you have? Let's talk about it. Don't hold it in." The burly man patted Su Zimo on the shoulder and said earnestly. Panting heavily, Su Zimo lowered his head and felt dizzy. His limbs were weak and he did not even have the strength to speak. A demonic glint flashed through the burly man's eyes. He waved his hand and a broken bowl filled with dew flew over from the flowers and plants not far away. The fingernail of the burly man's index finger extended half an inch and shone with a cold glint as he swiped it gently across his thumb. A small wound appeared on his thumb and a stream of blood flowed out. It was an extremely small stream of blood that was less than a 10,000th of a drop of blood. When it entered the dew of the broken bowl, it fused into it quickly. The dew was still clear and there was nothing unusual about it. The series of actions was extremely obscure and fast. The moment the burly man received the broken bowl, his index finger separated from his thumb and the wound on his thumb healed as soon as it appeared. Su Zimo had his head lowered and did not notice it at all. Carrying the broken bowl in his hands, the burly man came before Su Zimo and handed it over with a fake smile. Suddenly, his voice turned sinister and bewitching. "Little monk, it's been a tiring night for you as well. Drink some water." Although Su Zimo did not speak much for the entire night, he was truly mentally and physically exhausted. Looking at the clear water before him, he felt his mouth go dry. Coupled with the fact that his head was heavy and he was not awake at all, he did not think too much and received the broken bowl, downing it in a single gulp. Chapter 592. After drinking a bowl of cold water, Su Zimo felt much more energized. Clang! Clang! The sound of chains rang out. Suddenly, Su Zimo felt his body lighten. The thick chain that was initially restraining him was removed by the burly man. What's the meaning of this red-headed ghost? He's letting me go so easily. Su Zimo frowned slightly and looked at the burly man with a suspicious expression. The burly man squatted on the ground and played with the rusty chain in his hands. He chuckled at Su Zimo with a demonic glint in his eyes. Su Zimo's expression changed and he suddenly felt his stomach churn. Immediately after, an extremely rich life force essence burst forth and engulfed his entire body. Poof! 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 Su Zimo's skin exploded and streaks of blood appeared on his body in a shocking manner. That life force essence was way too massive. Every single inch of Su Zimo's flesh was torn apart. In the blink of an eye, he was covered in blood and a blood mist shrouded his body. His bloodline surged and emitted rumbling demonic chi. Ah! Su Zimo reared his head and howled into the skies. His eyes were bloodshot and the veins on his neck popped like spirit snakes. His body expanded uncontrollably and his flesh expanded. His tendons twitched, his bones creaked and his organs quaked. It was way too painful. The sudden burst of the terrifying life force essence within his body almost caused his body to explode. Pain was everywhere and Suzumo's body was hunched over as it convulsed. He felt his vision darken and could faint at any moment. Unknowingly, the old monk appeared at the back of the hall with a deep look of worry in his eyes. The burly man looked nervous as well and no longer had his initial relaxed smile. Roar! A series of hoarse roars sounded from the depths of Suzumo's throat, as though he was an injured wild beast that was struggling in its death throes. That life force essence was truly way too massive and terrifying. It was as though a destructive hurricane had formed within Suzumo's body, sweeping through everything with ease. Suzumo's consciousness gradually blurred. He could no longer sense his surroundings. He could only gasp for breath and rely on his remaining willpower to hold on. A figure flashed. The old monk came to Suzumo's side and glared at the burly man with a hint of anger. Then, the old monk stared at Suzumo without blinking. Although he appeared calm, the speed at which he fiddled with the prayer beads in his hand increased. It was clear how nervous he was. The big man grabbed his hair anxiously, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. After a while, Suzumo could no longer hold on and fell to the ground with a bang. His body was covered with mud and he fainted. Pa! The old monk was moved and in his agitation, the prayer beads in his hands were crushed. The big man was even more shocked. He stepped forward and slapped Suzumo's cheeks, shouting, "Little monk, wake up. Don't scare me." There was no reaction from Suzumo. His eyes were tightly shut and his heartbeat was getting weaker. The big man shouted a few more times with an anxious expression. There was still no reply from Suzumo and he was already on his last breaths. After a while, Suzumo's heart stopped beating completely and his breathing stopped as well. The blood in his body flowed slower until it stopped completely. Suzumo's body gradually turned cold and he sprawled on the ground motionlessly. It's over, it's over. The big man fell to the ground with a pale face and was completely stunned. What a good seedling. He can inherit my abilities perfectly and yet. The big man's gaze was blank as he muttered to himself. The old monk frowned and glared at the big man with a terrible expression. How much blood did you give him? Only a sliver, less than a 10,000th of a drop of blood. The big man did not dare to look into the old monk's eyes and replied softly. The old monk had cultivated Zen and Buddhism for countless years and had long seen the vicissitudes of life. There was nothing that could stir his emotions. However, when he heard that, the old monk was truly enraged as he questioned in a deep voice, "Are you crazy? The power of that sliver of blood is enough to destroy Jinying Jinjuan 10 times over. Yet, you fed him all of it." The big man was dejected and mumbled, "How dare that little monk call me a red-headed ghost? I wanted him to suffer a little. Who would have thought? You." The old monk was exasperated. I only wanted his inner core to recover as soon as possible." The big man stuttered out of guilt. When the old monk saw the look of regret and self-blame on the big man's face, he could not bring himself to reprimand the latter. Now that things had come to this, there was no turning back. Heis. The old monk sighed and lamented, perhaps this lad was destined for this calamity. To think that he couldn't break free from his fate even after coming to this place. I'm the one who harmed him. The big man's head was lowered in a daze. After a moment of silence, the old monk said softly, "Bury him here. This cemetery is filled with peerless experts from 10,000 years ago. It's worthy of his title." Even though that was the case, the old monk knew that a person's death was akin to an extinguished lamp. What undefeatable foundational stage! What evildoer of the millennial era! All of these titles will disappear along with the passage of time and be forgotten by everyone. The old monk sighed internally. Waving his sleeves, he swept up Su Zimo's corpse and was about to head into the depths of the cemetery. All of a sudden, the old monk's expression changed as he exclaimed softly, "He's not dead yet." The old monk placed Su Zimo down once more. His glabella shone and he released his spirit consciousness to scan Su Zimo's body. Su Zimo's condition was extremely unique. Although his heart had stopped beating, his initially shattered inner core was still spinning slowly. However, it was spinning extremely slowly and the old monk and the big man were too distracted to notice it initially. The big man came over and noticed the abnormality in Su Zimo's body as well. What a terrifying cultivation technique! The big man gasped in shock. His life force is already gone, but this cultivation technique is still circulating on its own. It's trying to pull this lad back from the gates of hell. The old monk said with a grim expression, although this lad has no heartbeat or breathing, he's only in a state of suspended animation. There should still be hope. There was a long silence. Dong. All of a sudden, a shudder sounded from Su Zimo's chest. Although the sound was weak, the old monk and the big man heard it loud and clear. A heartbeat. He was alive. The old monk and the big man were invigorated and their eyes lit up. Slowly, the heartbeat turned faster and stronger. Whoosh. His blood began to flow once more and the sound of a tsunami could be heard vaguely. Swoosh. Endless demonic chi exhaled from Su Zimo's mouth and nose. It was scarlet like blood and rumbled, forming a series of menacing ancient demon kings in the void. Wild ox, stone bear, anaconda, sanguine ape, divine steed, hell tiger and wind leopard. The 7 ancient demon kings were lifelike and had sharp fangs and claws. Glaring with bloodshot eyes, they were murderous and violent. Even with the old monk and the big man's cultivation, they were slightly moved. The next moment, demonic chi surged above the 7 ancient demon kings and a blood-red butterfly appeared vaguely. The full moon on its wings was like a pair of cold eyes that could shake one's soul. The old monk's expression changed starkly when he saw the butterfly. As though he recalled something, he could not help but take half a step back. The big man was so scared that he shuddered and knelt on the ground with a thud. Snot and tears streamed down his face as he kowtowed and wailed, "Big sister, I was wrong. That was an accident." Chapter 593. I did it out of goodwill. I really didn't do it on purpose. Look, isn't the little monk fine now? There's no need for you to be alarmed over such a small matter, right? Your cultivation technique is truly powerful. Reversing yin and yang, reversing the universe and reviving the dead, eh? As the burly man cried, he sensed that something was amiss. The blood-colored butterfly in midair did not move at all. There was no life aura within the butterfly as well. The burly man stared at the blood-colored butterfly for a moment and realized that it was an illusion created by Su Zimo's demonic chi. It did not possess any lethality at all. The burly man's face darkened and he wished he could slap himself. He had lived for countless years and had never been afraid even against the top existences of Tianhuang mainland, let alone lose his composure to such an extent. It was truly because that woman from 8 years ago was way too domineering and left a huge shadow in his heart. The moment the blood-colored butterfly appeared, he thought that the woman had returned. The burly man was already feeling guilty after nearly getting Su Zimo killed. Now that he saw the blood-colored butterfly descend, his first reaction was to think that it was here to settle scores with him. Instantly, he was scared out of his wits and fell to his knees with a thud. The old monk was much calmer. The burly man stood up awkwardly and coughed gently to hide his awkwardness. Thankfully, the little monk was unconscious the entire time and did not witness everything. Otherwise, he would have been utterly embarrassed. A look of mockery flashed through the old monk's murky eyes as he said slowly, "To think that the mighty, old bald monk Before the old monk could finish, he was interrupted by the burly man in exasperation. The burly man pointed at the old monk and his finger nearly poked the latter's face. Glaring with widened eyes, he snarled, "Shut up." The old monk sneered and shifted his gaze. When he saw that Su Zimo was out of danger and his breathing was stabilizing, he was relieved and turned to leave. Halfway through, the old monk paused in his tracks and murmured expressionlessly, "Red-headed ghost? That's a good name." The burly man froze for a moment before realizing that the old monk had already vanished from the backyard of the hall. The burly man clenched his fists so tightly that cracking sounds could be heard as he snarled, "Bloody hell, you old bald monk. Instead of chanting your sutras, you're in the mood to make fun of me." After an unknown period of time, Su Zimo slowly woke up. Su Zimo's eyes were blank. He struggled to sit up and rubbed his forehead. After sitting for a while, he gradually remembered what had happened before he fainted. Su Zimo could not help but recall the face of the red-headed ghost as a buzzing sound echoed in his ears. Su Zimo's entire body quivered. Almost without thinking, he leaped up and ran toward the main hall with all his strength. After running a few steps, Su Zimo's expression changed as he gradually discovered something strange. His physical body seemed to be stronger than before. The inner core at his chest had also regained some luster and a crack had already been repaired. Su Zimo suddenly remembered the bowl of clear water he drank at the end. The only problem was that bowl of water. "Little monk, from today onwards, come here every other month to drink a bowl of water." Right then, a familiar voice sounded. Previously, this voice nearly tortured Su Zimo into a lunatic. Su Zimo resisted the urge to run and turned around. In the depths of the cemetery, a burly man covered in chains laid on the ground with his hands behind his head. He did not even look at Su Zimo, as though he was resting with his eyes closed. Su Zimo could not help but ask, "Red-headed ghost, what's this water?" When he heard the words red-headed ghost, the burly man's mouth twitched and he said impatiently, "Just drink when I tell you to. Why are you spouting so much nonsense?" Su Zimo did not get angry even though he was snubbed. He could vaguely sense that the attitude of the burly man towards him had changed ever since he woke up. He could not tell what it was exactly. Something must have happened while he was unconscious. That bowl of water was not simple either. Prior to this, Su Zimo had consumed a 10,000-year vermilion fruit and his inner core did not show any signs of recovery even after receiving a massive amount of life force essence. However, after drinking that bowl of water, not only did his body strengthen, even one of the cracks on his inner core healed. That was not all. Su Zimo could clearly sense that there was still a massive amount of life force essence left in his body. Even if he cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness every night, that amount of energy would be enough to last him for a month. What sort of water possessed such a strong healing power and rich life force essence? What sort of water could possess such a miraculous power? Su Zimo searched through the ancient books he had read in detail but could not find any universal treasure that was compatible with the spirit water. However, he knew in his heart. With the support of sufficient spirit water, his inner core had a chance of recovering within a couple of years if nothing went wrong. If he continued cultivating, his inner core would be completed or even perfected in the near future. That cultivation speed was something that he could not achieve even if he was outside the Dragon Burial Valley with sufficient flesh and blood to consume. Su Zimo was in a great mood now that the hidden danger of his inner core was resolved. No matter how slow he was to react, he could tell that the burly man was helping him. At that thought, Su Zimo bowed deeply in the direction of the burly man and said seriously, "Red-headed ghost, thank you. There's a difference between good and evil even among ghosts. You must be a kind ghost, you're just a little too talkative. Get lost." The burly man hollered. Su Zimo fled in a fluster. Looking at Su Zimo's back view, the burly man revealed a row of sharp, pearly white teeth that creaked loudly. With a resentful expression, he said hatefully, you're the ghost. Your entire family are ghosts. By the time Su Zimo arrived at the courtyard of the Grand Hall, it was already noon. Ming Zhen was chanting sutras in the courtyard. When he saw Su Zimo return unscathed, his eyes widened and he closed in, asking in confusion, "Junior brother Ming Xian, you're all right?" Ming Zhen knew how terrifying the burly man in the backyard was. If he had been tortured for an entire night, he would be completely exhausted and dispirited. There was no way he would be as spirited and bright as Su Zimo. "I'm fine." Su Zimo had a relaxed expression as he patted Ming Zhen on the shoulder with a fake smile. "I'll be heading to the backyard again a month later. Do you want to come along?" "No, no." Ming Zhen's head shook like a rattle drum as he spoke resolutely. Su Zimo smiled. Right then, the old monk pushed open the door and said in a seemingly casual manner, "A woman arrived in the Dragon Burial Valley today and has been crying for more than 10 minutes. Sigh, in the blink of an eye, a year has passed." "A woman is crying?" Su Zimo froze for a moment. Immediately after, he seemed to have thought of something and turned to leave the old temple. With a worried expression, Ming Zhen turned around and asked, "Master, lend me your dermic weapon. I'll go protect little junior brother." "There's no need," the old monk shook his head. "Let him go by himself. He has the Mingwang prayer beads on his wrist so the evil spirits outside won't be able to get close to him." Chapter 594. Su Zimo pushed open the door and left. For a moment, he forgot about the existence of malevolent spirits outside the old temple. At that moment, the only thing in his mind was the scene of a woman crying above the Dragon Burial Valley a year later. Who was the one crying? Who was she crying for? Su Zimo already had a vague answer in his heart. The people outside all thought that he had died. Theoretically speaking, today was the anniversary of his death. After leaving the old temple, Su Zimo walked along the edge of the Rift Valley slowly. Not long after, he heard intermittent sobbing in his ears. After walking for a while more, Su Zimo came to a stop. Although his inner core had not healed completely, his hearing was still there. The sobbing woman was right above this place. There were two people, one at the bottom of the valley and the other at the top. They were thousands of feet apart. Su Zimo raised his head. It was dark above and he could not see anything. However, he already knew the identity of the person. A teardrop slid down silently, crossing the thousands of feet deep abyss and landing on Su Zimo's cheeks with a hint of warmth. Su Zimo was silent. After a long time, the sobs gradually turned softer until they stopped. "Zimo, today is the anniversary of your death. I'm here to visit you," the woman's voice sounded. For some reason, Su Zimo felt as though his heart had been struck heavily the moment he heard that. His vision turned blurry and a layer of mist appeared in his eyes. This was the Dragon Burial Valley. How many people wanted to avoid this place? How many powerful living beings had been buried in the past 10,000 years? Just a year ago, countless paragons of the North region were buried here. Notwithstanding this ominous place, just how much danger would one have to take to pass through the Great Qian ruins and the obstruction of the endless otherworldly soldiers to reach this place? "I'm the Empress of Great Zhou now. I don't dare to cry in front of others in the palace and neither can I cry. This is the only place where I can cry without fear. Zimo, you're not allowed to make fun of me. Zimo, don't worry. I've already hidden Mr. Su Hong. Unless I die, no one will find him. It's just that," pausing for a moment, the woman continued, "However, the cultivators of Glass Palace vented their anger on the citizens of the Yen country and many innocent people died. Thankfully, the cultivators of the Fiend's sect's Pure Maiden sect arrived and saved many people." Hearing this, Su Zimo clenched his fists, his eyes bursting with killing intent. Although Su Hong was fine, he loved the people as if they were his children. No one knew how tormented he would be when he heard that the citizens of Yen country were massacred. To Su Hong, it was probably a fate worse than death. Glazed tile palace. Su Zimo's gaze was gloomy. The killing intent in his eyes was almost tangible. The thing he was most afraid of when he stepped into the path of cultivation was to implicate his family. Who would have thought that in the end, it still couldn't be avoided? Although Su Hong was fine, the countless people who had died unnatural deaths were, in fact, implicated because of him. Fortunately, the appearance of the Pure Maiden sect attracted the attention of many sects and forces in the northern region. Almost everyone thought that it was the Pure Maiden sect who rescued Mr. Su. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. The woman's tone seemed to have turned much lighter. It's been a year since we last met. Let's talk about happy things. In any case, Mr. Su is fine. Don't worry, Zimo. Misty Peak is fine as well. I've also entered the Jin Dan realm. The woman murmured to herself above the Dragon Burial Valley, recounting everything that happened in the past year. Su Zimo listened quietly without saying anything and touched the cold stone wall gently with his palm. It was as though the 100,000 feet distance between him and the woman was gone through the stone wall. It was as though the two of them were right in front of each other. It was as though he was standing beside the woman and listening to her murmurs. Su Zimo's Jin Dan was crippled and the crack on his inner core had yet to heal completely. He could not fly in the air at all. He could not cross this 100,000 feet height to meet the woman above the Dragon Burial Valley. Su Zimo lowered his head slightly and his eyes dimmed. Even if he could fly in the air, he probably wouldn't choose to go up and meet the woman. That was because he was Su Zimo. He was the person who offended Glass Palace and the entire North region. He was a demon that the entire cultivation world could not tolerate. The moment he appeared in the North region, he would definitely be hunted down endlessly. Anyone who was related to him would be implicated. That was the case for Su Hong and the citizens of Yen country. If he were to walk out of the Dragon Burial Valley and choose to acknowledge the woman and return to Misty Peak, the only thing he would bring to the woman and Misty Peak would be a devastating catastrophe. The moment he walked out of the Dragon Burial Valley would be the moment he left the North region as well. Sunrise and sunset. Unknowingly, the sky gradually darkened and it was already dusk. Su Zimo could clearly sense that the malevolent qi in the surroundings was much denser. The Mingwang prayer beads on his left wrist shone with a mysterious glow. Many ghostly figures moved not far away, but none of them dared to advance. If that was the case at the bottom of the valley, it was naturally the same above as well. Su Zimo's eyes were filled with worry. Right now, he only hoped that the woman could leave this place as soon as possible. After a while, the skies darkened and the firmaments were filled with stars. The woman finally said softly, "Zimo, I've got to go." Su Zimo heaved a sigh of relief. After a moment, he saw that there was no more movement above. Just as he was about to return to the old temple, the woman's voice sounded once more with a hint of sobbing, "Zimo, I miss you." Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. The sobs gradually faded and the woman had already left. However, Su Zimo did not move for a long time and remained silent. The night passed and at daybreak, Su Zimo finally heaved a sigh of relief and moved back to the old temple. Ming Zhen looked at the dejected Su Zimo who pushed open the door and entered. His eyes were filled with confusion but he was too embarrassed to ask. He was only in his teens and had been living at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley isolated from the world. How could he know about such things? Winter came and summer came. Spring passed and autumn came. Every year on this day, there would be a woman above the Dragon Burial Valley, murmuring softly about everything that happened in the past year without stopping. Every year on this day, the woman seemed to have a lot to say that she could never finish. Every year on this day, Su Zimo would leave the old temple. He would spend an entire day and night outside. One would be at the bottom of the valley while the other would be at the top. They were thousands of miles apart and could not meet. Every year on this day, when Su Zimo returned from outside, Ming Zhen would be able to see an unresolvable sorrow in the depths of the latter's eyes. Finally, on this day, when he saw Su Zimo return to the old temple and enter the sutra chamber, Ming Zhen could no longer hold it in and ran to the old monk. "Master, what's wrong with little junior brother? Is there a woman waiting for little junior brother above the Dragon Burial Valley? Little junior brother's inner core is almost fully recovered and he can fly. Why isn't he going up to meet her?" Ming Zhen was filled with doubts as he asked all of them at once. There was a long silence. The old monk did not speak the entire time. Just as Ming Zhen was about to leave in disappointment, the old monk opened his eyes and sighed gently. Fate is shallow in a lifetime but deep in love. Chapter 595. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed since the appearance of the vermilion fruit in the Great Qian ruins and the battle between the paragons. However, the impact of that battle did not subside because of the passage of time. Instead, it was expanding continuously. The flames of war were everywhere in the north region. The various vassal states constantly clashed with each other, attacking cities and seizing territories. Within a year, there would be several changes in dynasties. Under such frequent wars, countless lives were lost, their homes broken, and their families destroyed. However, the Great Shang, Great Yu and Great Xia dynasties were eyeing covetously from the outside, and the Great Zhou dynasty had no time to care about anything else. Furthermore, Ji Yaoshue had just ascended to the throne of the empress and was a woman. She was the first in history. The imperial court was in chaos and countless monsters came out. Chaos was beginning to appear in the Great Zhou dynasty. Thankfully, the Great Zhou dynasty had been established for 10,000 years and had a firm foundation. With a deep foundation, it could still control the situation. However, some knowledgeable people in the imperial court could tell that the Great Zhou dynasty would face a calamity in less than 100 years if things were to continue developing at this rate. If they were not careful, their 10,000 years of foundation could be destroyed overnight. If anything were to happen, the calamity would be brought forward and could happen at any moment. The Great Zhou dynasty was already in trouble internally and externally. This was a huge test for the current empress of Great Zhou, Ji Yaoshue. No matter how turbulent the north region was, there was a secret place in the depths of the Great Qian ruins that was isolated from the world and away from the hustle and bustle. Bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. For 5 years. 2 young monks and an old monk chanted sutras and paid respects to Buddha in this inconspicuous old temple every day. A little fox guarded by the side in a peaceful and serene manner. The sound of chains could only be heard occasionally from the backyard of the grand hall. This morning, a monk with delicate features walked out of the sutra chamber. Tidying his clothes, he pushed open the doors of the old temple and headed outside. For 5 years. It was the same every year on this day. The little monk in the old temple was already used to it and merely raised his head to take a glance before retracting his gaze and continuing to comprehend the sutras. Backyard of the Grand Hall. The old monk had just paid his respects to an old friend and swept his gaze. When he caught sight of a burly man lying in the cemetery lazily, he suddenly said, "Red-headed ghost, that lad's inner core has already been repaired. There's no need for him to come over in the future. He should focus on chanting sutras and finding a way to recover his Jin Dan." Ah! The burly man panicked when he heard that and jumped up. He didn't care that the old monk called him a red-headed ghost and shouted, "That won't do. I won't take up his time during the day. During the day, he can meditate on the things of Buddhism. At night, he has to come to my place to cultivate." Besides, 5 years have passed, and he has been comprehending the scriptures all day long, but there hasn't been the slightest movement in his dantian. Even if he were to wait another 50 years, it might still be useless. In my opinion, learning the things of Buddhism is a waste of time. The old monk was expressionless as he asked, "Isn't it a waste of time to drink your blood?" "Of course. The burly man said proudly, after drinking my blood for 5 years, putting aside the fact that his inner core is healed, this brat's current physical body is much more terrifying than 5 years ago. Let the Jin Dan's spiritual master outside beat him as he pleases. The old monk sneered. The big man mumbled, I don't care. He has to come to my place to cultivate at night. It's unknown if his Jin Dan can recover. Even you can't do anything about it. You can't waste all his time on that. The old monk frowned and glared at the burly man meaningfully, asking, you must have other motives for being so concerned, right? What motives can I have? The burly man patted his chest loudly and declared righteously, I'm indebted to that woman back then. I'm not someone who doesn't repay her kindness. Pausing for a moment, the burly man's eyes darted around as though he had thought of something. With a strange expression, he rubbed his chin and said, however, there's something that this brat has that's beyond my expectations. Now that his inner core has recovered, I'm going to impart to him something else from tonight onwards. Ha! What is it? The old monk asked. The burly man chuckled. It's just a small trick that won't be presentable. The old monk smiled gently and turned to leave. He knew the burly man too well. The more the burly man said that, the more complicated the trick was. Below the Dragon Burial Valley, a young monk stood there. Wearing gray monk robes, he had refined features and his palms touched the cold stone wall gently. His ears twitched, as though he was listening to something. Zimo, I'm here again. Sigh, Mr. Su's health hasn't been good all these years and his hair has turned white. It's partly because of your death and partly because of the citizens of Yen country. I've learned a lot from him. He's a truly wise ruler. Unfortunately, the woman recounted everything that happened in the past year unhurriedly, as though she was chatting with someone. The young monk listened quietly. When he heard that Mr. Su's health was deteriorating, the young monk would reveal a worried expression. When he heard something interesting, the young monk would smile as well. One was at the top of the valley while the other was at the bottom. Although the two of them could not meet, it was as though there was an invisible string that connected them, sharing their joys and sorrows. Unknowingly, it was already noon. All of a sudden, a smug laughter sounded from above the Dragon Burial Valley. Ha 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 ha. A man's voice sounded. It's indeed the Empress of Great Zhou. What a coincidence. I'm Si Junyu of the Great Xia dynasty. I've been friends with you for a long time, fellow Taoist Yao Xue. Oh, right. Jun Hao, who died in your hands in the ancient battlefield, was my elder brother. Si Junyu laughed. I've got to thank you, fellow Taoist. Otherwise, with my elder brother around, would never have a chance to shine. Empress, please leave first. Another man's voice sounded with a deep and powerful tone. The young monk frowned slightly. The voice sounded familiar and seemed to belong to perfected Lord Mingzhe, the bodyguard of the Empress of Great Zhou in the past. The young monk felt slightly relieved. With Jining Jinjuan protecting the woman, nothing should go wrong. Humph. You want to leave? Si Junyu sneered, you won't be able to escape today even if you grow wings. Perfected Lord Mingzhe, how have you been? Mingzhe, today is the day you die. Immediately after, two other voices sounded with murderous intent. Although he did not witness it personally, the young monk could vaguely guess that Si Junyu had come prepared and even invited two Jining Jinjuan to deal with perfected Lord Mingzhe. True enough. Si Junyu said coldly, fellow Taoist Yao Xue, you're indeed cautious and only brought one person with you for fear of attracting too much attention. However, don't forget that this is the Great Qian ruins where all sorts of people mix together and it doesn't belong to the territory of Great Zhou. It's impossible for you to avoid attention completely. TSK, TSK, TSK. Si Junyu laughed. How interesting. To think that the Empress of Great Zhou would take such a huge risk to come here every year on this day. Seems like the monster incarnate that died 5 years ago has a rather special relationship with you, huh? I heard that the monster incarnate's elder brother went missing. You couldn't have hidden him, right? Ha 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 ha. What do you want? The woman interrupted Si Junyu's laughter. Si Junyu retracted his smile and said coldly, of course, I want to use your head to ascend to the throne. Bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley. The young monk's gaze was cold. Chapter 596. Above Dragon Burial Valley. Ji Yaoshue and perfected Lord Ming-Zhe stood at the edge of the cliff with no way out. Perfected Lord Ming-Zhe had a grim expression. The two Jinying Jinjuan standing in midair had frightening auras and sharp gazes, both of them were cultivators from Heavenly Piercing Sword sect. The horse-faced one on the left was called Gu Suchi, who specialized in dual swords. The skinny old man on the right was called Perfected Lord Tian Chen. His unparalleled sword technique was unstoppable. Both of them were renowned experts of the North region and were even more reputable than him. If it was a one-on-one fight, Perfected Lord Ming-Zhe was confident of dealing with them. However, if both of them were to attack at the same time, he would definitely lose. Behind Si Junyu stood 20 perfected Jin Dan. Apart from the 10 top-tier guards of the Great Xia dynasty, there were 10 Jin Dan realm sword cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword sect. Almost all of them were late-stage Jin Dan and perfected Jin Dan. Any 2 or 3 of those 20 people would be enough to suppress Ji Yaoshue. It was clear that the other party had planned this for a long time and came prepared. They did not intend to give them any chance. Perfected Lord Ming-Zhe was anxious and frowned. Given the current situation, he could barely protect himself, let alone protect Ji Yaoshue and escape. In the cultivation world, sword cultivators were the ones with the most frightening killing power. Who could guarantee that they would be able to escape unscathed against the combined attacks of 2 great sword cultivators? Ji Yaoshue had a calm expression and glared at Si Junyu coldly without any hint of fear or submission in her eyes. Piak! 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 Si Junyu clapped and nodded with a smile. You're indeed the empress of a dynasty to be able to remain calm even now. I hope that you'll still be as composed when you land in my hands later on. Fufu, I'm looking forward to it. Attack! Clang! Clang! The sound of swords being unsheathed could be heard. Besides Si Junyu, 5 guards and 5 sword cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword sect attacked at the same time and charged towards Ji Yaoshue. There were another 10 people guarding Si Junyu's surroundings. Ji Yaoshue's gaze was cold as she channeled Jin Dan and slapped her storage bag. Whoosh! 2 flying swords hovered in front of him and tore through the air. Yo! Si Junyu pretended to be surprised as he shouted, 2 supreme-grade flying swords. Impressive, impressive. Ha! Clad in armor, the 5 great Xia guards took a step forward with cold expressions and struck at the same time. Their movements were uniform and imposing. Clang! 5 thick-backed long sabers heavily chopped down on the incoming flying swords. Sparks flew everywhere. The 5 long sabers were only high-grade spiritual weapons. However, their cultivation levels were all above Ji Yaoshue's. Moreover, the 5 of them were clearly proficient in joint attacks. With 5 slashes, the supreme-grade flying sword was sent flying. A Heavenly Piercing Sword sect sword cultivator had a mocking look in his eyes as he struck right away. With a twist of his sword, Sword Chi burst forth and sent another flying sword flying. The difference was too great. In just one round, she had already lost control of 2 supreme-grade flying swords. Swish! Swish! The other 4 Sword Chi instantly descended and streaked across Ji Yaoshue's body. Buzz! Ji Yaoshue's robes shone brightly and 4 spirit patterns burst forth in a bedazzling manner, blocking the killing Sword Chi. That robe was personally crafted for her by Su Zimo back then. Although it could block the sharpness of the swords, it could not block off the power of the swords completely. Ji Yaoshua grunted dully and her face turned paler. To be fair, if Si Junyu had not wanted to capture her alive, it would have been way too easy for those sword cultivators to kill her. Si Junyu said leisurely, Ji Yaoshua, I advise you to surrender obediently so that you don't have to suffer. Ji Yaoshua grit her teeth and refused to submit. Channeling her Jin Dan wildly, she conjured hand seals and released a secret skill of the great Zhou dynasty. Emperor's Imperial Qi. Spirit energy circulated wildly within Ji Yaoshua's body and gathered at her fingers according to her unique meridians. With a light tap of his finger, spirit energy gushed out, forming streaks of sword qi that resembled a rain of spears and arrows in midair, shooting towards the 10 golden cores that were charging towards him. The Emperor's Imperial Qi was a secret skill of the Great Qian Empire. Even the Great Zhou dynasty only managed to obtain an incomplete page of it. Even so, the power of that secret skill was not to be underestimated as it consumed a lot of spirit energy. Ji Yaoshua had just entered the Jin Dan realm and her spirit energy was almost depleted after releasing that spirit art. Her Jin Dan was already throbbing with pain. Clang! 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 Be it the great Xia guards or the sword cultivators of heavenly piercing sword sect, they were fearless. Brandishing their sabers and swords, the incoming sword qi was shattered and turned into nothingness. The Emperor's Imperial Qi could not stop the 10 perfected Jin Dan perfected beings either. Ji Yaoshua grit her teeth with a resolute gaze. The Dragon Burial Valley was right behind her. She was the Empress of Great Zhou and would rather die than fall into the hands of Si Junyu and be humiliated. At most, she would be smashed to pieces. In midair. The outcome of the fight between perfected Lord Ming Zhe and the 2 sword cultivators was about to be decided. To be precise, it was a life and death battle. Perfected Lord Ming Zhe had already used all his strength and trump cards. However, he could not defend against the sharpness of the 2 sword cultivators and was already covered in injuries with blood staining his robes. Heis! Perfected Lord Ming Zhe's eyes dimmed as he sighed internally. Forget it, forget it. After cultivating for hundreds of years, I still can't have a good ending. That's the cultivation world. Seems like the Dragon Burial Valley is truly an ominous place. Perfected Lord Ming Zhe laughed in a self-deprecating manner. Below, Ji Yaoshua had nowhere to retreat. She turned to look at the dark and mysterious Dragon Burial Valley behind her. There was no fear or sorrow in her eyes, instead, there was a hint of relief and relief. Zimo, did you jump down from here 5 years ago? 5 years later, I'm coming to accompany you. Ji Yaoshua smiled sweetly and leaped down towards the Dragon Burial Valley. All of a sudden, a white light flashed and coiled around Ji Yaoshua's waist like an agile snake at an extremely fast speed. Ji Yaoshua was about to fall when she was suddenly coiled by a spirit rope that was filled with spirituality and pulled back from the edge of the cliff. The other end of the spirit rope was held in the hands of a great Xia guard. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The spirit rope coiled around continuously and instantly, Ji Yaoshua's limbs were bound, there was no way she could break free. Si Junyu reared his head in laughter and said smugly, fellow Taoist Yaoshua, I've already expected this from you and was prepared for it. You want to die a quick and painless death? Not so easy. Ji Yaoshua's face was pale. She was not afraid of death, but she was worried that she would be humiliated in Si Junyu's hands. At that time, the entire Great Zhou dynasty would be reduced to a laughing stock. Bring this woman to me. Si Junyu's eyes shone brightly as he roared in laughter. I want to see how the Empress of Great Zhou will react when she kneels before me. Ha 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 ha. Understood. A guard strode forward and reached out, wanting to lift Ji Yaoshua up. All of a sudden, something strange happened. On the other side of the battlefield, a gray figure barged in at an extremely fast speed with a torrential killing intent, arriving before them in the blink of an eye. No one saw where this person came from. It was as though he appeared out of thin air. You, one of the sword cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword sect, was alarmed. The moment he spoke, he was sent flying before he could even raise his sword. This person's body was still in mid-air when it exploded with a bang and turned into a cloud of blood mist, dying on the spot. A sword cultivator was smashed to death. Chapter 597. The intruder was way too fast. Everyone merely saw a blur before the intruder barged into the crowd and killed a sword cultivator before arriving before Ji Yaoxue. In fact, no one could even make out the gender of the intruder, let alone their appearance. Who's there? The great Xia guard beside Ji Yaoxue hollered and channeled Jin Dan furiously. Spirit energy burst forth as he slashed in reverse towards the intruder's head. Bang! The intruder did not dodge or retreat and was even faster. Before the saber above his head descended, he struck first and punched the great Xia guard in the chest. The body of the great Xia guard was directly smashed into pieces. Yet another Jin Dan perfected being was dead. Pust! Everyone's expression changed. They sucked in a breath of cold air and subconsciously took half a step back. After killing 2 people in a row, the intruder stopped beside Ji Yaoxue and bent down slightly. Reaching out, he grabbed the spirit rope on the latter's body and tugged. Crack! 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 The spirit rope snapped and was ripped into several pieces. The expressions of the great Xia guards who were cold and murderous changed at that moment as well. Although the spirit rope looked inconspicuous, even a perfected Jin Dan would find it difficult to break free as long as it coiled around the opponent, let alone rip it apart. What sort of power was that? It was only at that moment that many cultivators could make out the appearance of the intruder. A monk? The intruder was a middle-aged monk wearing light gray monk robes that were washed white. He had a strong figure and a resolute expression. The strangest thing was that they could not sense any spirit energy fluctuation from him. Even Jinying Jinjuan could not detect the intruder's cultivation with his spirit consciousness, let alone them. It was as though the middle-aged monk was shrouded by an invisible barrier that could block out spirit consciousness. Initially, perfected Lord Mingzhe was delighted when he saw that someone had stepped in to save him. When he saw that person clearly, perfected Lord Mingzhe's eyes were filled with disappointment. Although he was unable to detect the true state of this middle-aged monk, he could not sense a trace of magic power from this person's body. In other words, this middle-aged monk was at most a Jin Dan cultivator. In the current situation, even if the number 1 Jin Dan spiritual master were to arrive, it would be of no help. This was because there were 2 nascent soul realm sword cultivators on the other side. This was the most terrifying power that could not be ignored. Clearly, Gu Suqi and perfected Lord Tian Chen had also roughly deduced the middle-aged monk's cultivation through their experience. Perfected Lord Tian Chen sneered, a mere Jin Dan doesn't know what's good for you. When he heard that, Si Junyu heaved a sigh of relief. As long as the person who came was a Jin Dan cultivator, there would be no accidents. Everyone's gaze landed on the middle-aged monk. Ji Yaoxue was the same. She looked at the unfamiliar face in front of her, and a trace of confusion flashed across her eyes. She did not know this person, so why would this person risk his life to save her? Thank you, fellow Taoist. Even though she was confused, Ji Yaoxue still expressed her gratitude. The middle-aged monk nodded expressionlessly. Ji Yaoxue frowned as a strange feeling welled up in her heart. She could not put her finger on it. Where did this wild monk come from? How dare you interfere in the affairs of the great Xia dynasty? Si Junyu hollered and interrupted Ji Yaoxue's thoughts. The middle-aged monk turned around and swept his gaze across the 3 Jinying Jinjuan spiritual masters who were still fighting in midair. After pondering for a moment, his gaze landed on Si Junyu, who was not far away, and a killing intent surged in his eyes as he stomped his feet. Boom! The ground quaked. The many perfected Jin Dan spiritual masters present felt their hearts skip a beat. The middle-aged monk had already vanished from the spot. Like an ancient ferocious beast, he charged forward with a frightening might. Everywhere he passed, the soil was overturned, and sand and stones flew in all directions. A huge gully appeared behind him. It was way too domineering. The ferocious aura was suffocating. A great Xia guard reacted slightly slower and had just raised the saber on his back when the middle-aged monk's palm descended. Poof! That person's head was smashed into his chest and his neck was shattered. He died on the spot. Another great Xia guard's saber descended. Without even looking, that person clenched his fist and punched the saber with his body of flesh. Die! The great Xia guard growled with a ferocious gaze. Snap! There was no expected sound of the saber cutting into flesh. There was no expected flash of blood either. Everyone could clearly see that the middle-aged monk had actually shattered this superior-grade spirit artifact saber with a thick back that was forged from pure gold crystals with his bare hands. Poof! Countless shards flew in reverse and riddled the great Xia guard's body with blood gushing out. The man's eyes were wide open as he fell straight to the ground. Where did this demonic monk come from? A sword cultivator of heavenly piercing sword sect at the side channeled his spirit energy and the sword in his hands vibrated. Buzzing endlessly, it burst forth with 5 spirit lights that were sharp and chilling. It was a perfect spirit weapon. Swash! The sword in that person's hands trembled. Instantly, sword flowers appeared one after another in midair. There were a total of 13 of them. There were so many sword shadows that it was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. The middle-aged monk's gaze flickered and he reached out with his palm. He found the true body of the sword instantly. Not only that, the middle-aged monk's 5 fingers seemed like they were made of molten steel. Looking strong and powerful, they avoided the sharpness of the sword ingeniously and pressed down on the spine of the sword. All the sword shadows dissipated. The sword flowers withered. The sword cultivator's expression changed and he instinctively wanted to withdraw his sword. Unexpectedly, the perfect spirit weapon sword was held down by the middle-aged monk's fingers and could not move at all, as though it was pinned beneath a mountain. Not good. Smelling a dangerous aura, that person knew that things were bad and wanted to retreat. However, it was already too late. The middle-aged monk slid forward and pressed down on the sword with his 5 fingers, pushing it forward gently. His movements were smooth and fluid without any sluggishness. The sword sliced across that person's throat. Although it was a simple move, it was enough to claim that person's life. Shing! A blood mist spewed out. The sword cultivator pressed down on the wound on his throat with all his might. However, he could not stop the bleeding and his eyes dimmed rapidly. Another 3 perfected Jin Dan beings were dead. Although the entire process seemed slow on the surface, it happened in the blink of an eye. The middle-aged monk did not stop in his tracks at all. In the blink of an eye, he had already left the 5 perfected Jin Dan beings behind him and arrived before Si Junyu. Si Junyu was a little flustered. He had never seen such methods before. His guards and even the sword cultivators of heavenly piercing sword sect were like paper in the hands of the middle-aged monk and could not even last a single move. The middle-aged monk's attacks were ruthless and decisive. They were all killing moves without mercy. Kill him for me. Si Junyu hollered. In front of him were 5 great Xia guards and 5 sword cultivators of heavenly piercing sword sect. In Si Junyu's opinion, as long as the 10 perfected Jin Dan beings could hold back the middle-aged monk, the 2 Jinying Jinjuan beings in midair would kill perfected Lord Mingzhe and return immediately. That person would be dead for sure. Kill! The 5 great Xia guards roared and attacked at the same time. Boom! The eyes of one of the sword cultivators of Heavenly Piercing Sword sect lit up and an extremely terrifying aura burst forth from his body. He did not test the waters and released his Jin Dan phenomenon right away. Chapter 598. 7 Swords Heaven Piercing. The person hollered and the sword chi within his body hummed. The Jin Dan churned wildly and spirit energy howled. 7 gigantic swords appeared behind him, sharp as though they wanted to rip the firmaments into shreds. 7 Swords Heaven Piercing. He was ranked 78th on the previous phenomenon ranking. It was clear that this sword cultivator had received the true legacy of Heavenly Piercing Sword sect and was able to comprehend the Jin Dan phenomenon because of his high comprehension. The Jin Dan phenomenon could release the most terrifying attacks of the Jin Dan realm. However, the Jin Dan phenomenon of sword cultivators was even more lethal. Just as the middle-aged monk rushed forward, the 5 great Xia guards in front of him had a tacit understanding. They unleashed a joint attack and attacked at the same time. The 5 sabers seemed to have fused into one, forming a massive saber that descended from the skies with an aura that could annihilate everything. Apart from that, there were 4 long swords that shone with a chilling glint that came from different angles. Before they even arrived, the sharpness of the swords was already chilling. The most terrifying attack was the Jin Dan phenomenon that was just released, 7 Swords Heaven Piercing. Kill him! Kill him! Si Junyu hollered with a menacing expression. The middle-aged monk's expression was unchanged. Against the incoming attack, his eyes lit up and he opened his mouth, releasing an earth-shaking Sanskrit sound from the depths of his throat. Om. That syllable was extremely strange and was definitely not an ordinary language of Tianhuang mainland. Coming from the mouth of the middle-aged monk, it possessed an inexplicable might. Even though there was no spirit energy fluctuation within the middle-aged monk's body, the Sanskrit sound reverberated through the world endlessly, as though it could penetrate through all obstacles and reach one's heart. That was a Sanskrit sound that was released with the power of one's organs and throat alone. Sound wave secret skill. The expressions of the 3 Jinying Jinjuan in midair changed slightly. Sound wave secret skills were the rarest secret skills in the cultivation world. They were extremely difficult to cultivate and were only passed down by some super sects and top factions. The Daming mantra was a secret technique that the Daming temple used to shock the entire Tianhuang region. It had been lost for tens of thousands of years. Jinying Jinjuan's lifespan was no more than 1,000 years, so the 3 Jinying Jinjuan naturally could not recognize the origin of this secret technique. On the battlefield, the 10 Jin Dan spiritual masters were caught off guard, and their bodies trembled. The long sabers in the hands of the 5 great Xia guards and the long swords in the hands of the 4 swordsmen all showed signs of stagnation. In the eyes of ordinary cultivators, this kind of stagnation might not be much. However, in the eyes of the middle-aged monk, it was a huge flaw. A trace of stagnation meant that there was a trace of exhaustion in his strength. The middle-aged monk did not dodge. Instead, he took the initiative and swung his arm backward. Like a thick steel whip, his arm smashed heavily onto the 5 sabers. Ka ka ka. The long sabers were all shattered. The 5 great Xia guards turned pale with fright. Just as the 5 of them were about to retreat, they realized that the middle-aged monk did not continue to pursue them. Instead, he turned and pounced towards the other 4 Heavenly Piercing Sword sect sword cultivators. Before the 5 of them could react, another Sanskrit voice boomed in their ears. It was truly an explosive sound. It was as though thunder had exploded in their ears. Ma! The 5 of them widened their eyes and were instantly bloodshot as they froze on the spot. They felt as though their heads were smashed by a sledgehammer as they lost consciousness momentarily. Initially, the 4 Heavenly Piercing Sword sect sword cultivators had just snapped out of their stupor and were about to continue attacking when they heard the second Sanskrit voice. The 4 of them revealed pained expressions as their facial features contorted together. They could no longer hold their swords in their hands, let alone continue attacking. The middle-aged monk's gaze was cold as he charged in front of the four of them. In the blink of an eye, he punched out 4 times consecutively and exploded the heads of the 4 sword cultivators. The remaining sword cultivator did not attack the entire time. It was not that he did not want to, but that he could not. The moment the 2 Sanskrit voices sounded, that person's heart skipped a beat. Before the 7 gigantic swords behind him could materialize completely, they swayed and showed signs of dissipating. That person could barely fend for himself, how could he attack the middle-aged monk? In the blink of an eye, 4 of his fellow sect mates were dead. At that moment, the middle-aged monk had already arrived before him. The next moment, his pupils constricted violently. Right in front of him, the middle-aged monk opened his mouth once more. "Ni." The 3rd Sanskrit voice sounded. The first to suffer are the 5 great Xia guards who were rooted to the spot. Against the impact of the 3 Sanskrit voices, the 5 of them were already bleeding from their eyes, ears, mouths and noses. They were bleeding from all 7 orifices. It seemed like there were no injuries on the 5 of them. However, their brains had already been shattered into pieces. The 5 of them fell stiffly with dim gazes. Right from the beginning, the middle-aged monk had not touched them at all, they were killed by the impact of the 3 Sanskrit voices. As for the remaining sword cultivator, his face was pale and his eyes were filled with fear. Against the impact of the 3 Sanskrit voices, his Jin Dan phenomenon was already trembling endlessly and could collapse at any moment. He had cultivated for more than 200 years and had fought countless battles, he could be considered as a genius of heavenly piercing sword sect. However, he had never seen such a method of combat. There was no spirit energy fluctuation within the body. The sound alone was enough to shake the power of his phenomenon. In other words, if he did not have the protection of Jin Dan's phenomenon, he would be severely injured even if he did not die from the impact of the 3 Sanskrit voices. The next moment, the middle-aged monk closed in and opened his mouth once more. Pa! The 4th Sanskrit voice. At the same time, the moment the 4th Sanskrit voice descended, the middle-aged monk struck brazenly and his gigantic fist smashed against Jin Dan's phenomenon. Snap! The 7 swords were all broken. The remaining perfected being Jin Dan felt his teeth ache and was shocked. How could anyone have witnessed such power? Jin Dan's phenomenon was perfected being Jin Dan's strongest attack. Even the most top-tier spirit arts might not be able to fight against it. But now, everyone was witnessing someone taking on Jin Dan's phenomenon head-on with their bodies. The most frightening thing was that heavenly piercing sword sect's 7 swords heaven piercing was like a chicken against this person's Sanskrit voice and fist, it could not withstand a single blow. Poof! Jin Dan's phenomenon shattered and the remaining sword cultivator shuddered and spat out a mouthful of blood. The middle-aged monk did not give him any chance at all. Striding forward, he extended his finger and tapped the person's throat gently. Snap! The person's throat was shattered and he died on the spot. Si Junyu was completely stunned. He truly had not expected that 10 perfected beings of Jin Dan and even an expert who had cultivated a Jin Dan phenomenon would not be able to stop the middle-aged monk for a single moment. Although the entire process seemed long, it only took 3 breaths in reality. Before Si Junyu could react, the middle-aged monk had already arrived in front of him. At that moment, even if Gu Suqi and Tian Chen, the 2 Jinying Jinjuan wanted to save him, it was already too late. How dare you! Perfected Lord Tian Chen's expression changed starkly when he caught sight of that from the corner of his eye as he hollered. Bald monk, you'll definitely die today if you dare to take his life. Gu Suqi said coldly. Chapter 599. Instantly, Si Junyu was scared out of his wits. Ah! Si Junyu withdrew a long sword that shone with a cold glint from his storage bag. Spirit energy surged wildly as he thrust it towards the middle-aged monk's head. At the same time, Si Junyu tore apart a protection talisman that he had been clutching in his left hand the entire time. Whoosh! Golden light shone brightly around Si Junyu, forming an indestructible barrier of light. The middle-aged monk did not dodge or avoid the incoming sword and flicked his finger gently. His fingertip collided with the sword. Clang! The sword in Si Junyu's hands was snapped by the middle-aged monk's finger. Si Junyu's palm cracked and he could not hold on to the sword any longer, letting it fall out of his hands. Thereafter, he felt his vision blur and the middle-aged monk's figure disappear. To everyone else, the middle-aged monk snapped the sword with his finger before taking a step forward and circling behind Si Junyu. The middle-aged monk's movements were way too smooth. It was as smooth as flowing water and there was no pause in between from the moment he attacked. The middle-aged monk stuck his entire body forward like an anaconda, coiling around the golden barrier around Si Junyu and exerting strength. Crack! 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 Cracks appeared on the golden barrier one after another. After a momentary pause, the golden barrier shattered. The middle-aged monk reached out and gripped Si Junyu's neck, exerting strength in his fingers. Si Junyu felt his entire body go limp and his limbs go limp. He could not move at all and could only allow the middle-aged monk to lift him up. Everyone, stop! The middle-aged monk turned around and said coldly. The two great Xia guards and 3 heavenly piercing sword sect sword cultivators who were chasing behind him stopped in their tracks hurriedly with deep fear in their eyes. This middle-aged monk was way too ruthless. From the moment he attacked until now, all the perfected Jin Dan that stood in his way were dead without a single survivor. This was not a benevolent monk at all, he was more like a fiend who was bloodthirsty. In the blink of an eye, Si Junyu was in the hands of the middle-aged monk. Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen had no choice but to give up on killing Perfected Lord Ming Zhe for the time being. Instantly, Perfected Lord Ming Zhe relaxed and fell from midair in his exhaustion. Thankfully, Ji Yaoshue rushed forward and supported him. The situation in front of him suddenly became delicate. On the side of the Great Xia dynasty, there were still 5 perfected Jin Dan cultivators and 2 terrifying nascent soul cultivators left. On the side of the Great Zhou dynasty, Ji Yaoshue released the Son of Heaven's imperial air technique. Her spiritual energy was already exhausted, and her combat power was limited. Perfected Lord Ming Zhe was covered in injuries and could no longer fight. On the surface, it seemed like the Great Zhou dynasty was at a complete disadvantage. However, the ingenious thing was that Si Junyu had landed in the hands of the middle-aged monk. Suddenly, Perfected Lord Ming Zhe and the others understood the middle-aged monk's intentions. If he were to fight them head-on, he wouldn't be a match for 2 nascent soul realm sword cultivators. The only way to break out of this situation and obtain a chance of survival was to capture Luo Junyu alive with the momentum of a thunderbolt and take control of the situation. What a powerful monk! Perfected Lord Ming Zhe sighed internally. The fact that the middle-aged monk was able to find the only way to break out of the situation in such a short period of time was proof of his understanding of the situation and his meticulous mind. In reality, Perfected Lord Ming Zhe had yet to realize the middle-aged monk's true intentions at that moment. By the time he realized it, what he felt was not only shock, but fear. How gutsy did the other party have to be to harbor such thoughts? Ji Yaoshue supported Perfected Lord Ming Zhe and looked at the middle-aged monk not far away with a slight frown. For some unknown reason, she felt that something was amiss. If the middle-aged monk was only at Jin Dan realm and they did not know each other, why would he take such a huge risk to save her? Not only did he attack, he did it so decisively, as though he was enraged. Si Junyu and the others were targeting her. Where did the middle-aged monk's rage come from? Could this person have a blood feud with the Great Xia dynasty in the past and his attack today was merely a coincidence? Ji Yaoshue could not figure it out. Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen glared at the middle-aged monk with cold expressions, as though they wanted to make out something from his face. The middle-aged monk was expressionless and his eyes were indifferent as well. Gu Suchi narrowed his eyes and said coolly, "There's a saying in the Buddhist monasteries that bodhisattvas are benevolent because they lower their heads. Monk, as someone of the Buddhist monasteries, you're way too murderous. There's a saying in the Buddhist monasteries as well that only the wrath of a Vajra can subdue demons." The middle-aged monk's gaze was like a torch, it was truly the descent of a Vajra that could not be looked at directly. Humph. Perfected Lord Tian Chen's eyes shone with a chilling killing intent as he said coldly, "Monk, if you dare to harm his life, I'll tear you into pieces and grind your bones to dust." Against Jining Jinjuan's threat, the middle-aged monk was unmoved and instead exerted even more strength in his grip. Si Junyu's face turned purplish but he could not say anything. Gu Suchi's gaze flickered as he suddenly said, "We won't get anything out of this stalemate. How about we make a deal?" "Oh." The middle-aged monk raised his brow slightly. Gu Suchi said in a deep voice, "Release him and we'll leave immediately." The middle-aged monk pondered for a moment before asking, "How do I know that you guys won't go back on your words?" Perfected Lord Tian Chen and Gu Suchi exchanged glances and understood what was going on. A crafty look flashed through their eyes as they replied hurriedly, "As Jining Jinjuan, the two of us value our reputations. We won't go back on our words." When he heard that, Perfected Lord Mingzhe was alarmed. In the cruel cultivation world, there was no way a verbal promise as such could be taken seriously unless it was someone whom one could trust completely. Furthermore, even if Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen went back on their words and killed them, news of this would definitely not spread and their reputations would naturally not be affected at all. Initially, Perfected Lord Mingzhe thought that given the middle-aged monk's wisdom, he would definitely be able to see through the dangers involved. However, he had not expected the middle-aged monk to be so tempted. For real. The middle-aged monk frowned slightly and looked at the two Jining Jinjuan before asking again. "A promise is a promise that cannot be taken back." Gu Suchi suppressed the ecstasy in his heart and replied with a firm tone without revealing anything. In his opinion, although the middle-aged monk had some tricks up his sleeves and was extremely intelligent, he might have been reciting sutras in seclusion all year round and had way too little experience roaming the cultivation world. As long as they could save Si Junyu, it would be the death of the middle-aged monk. "Don't." Perfected Lord Mingzhe was anxious and was about to speak when the middle-aged monk nodded. "All right, I'll trust you guys." With that, the middle-aged monk carried Si Junyu and walked towards the two Jining Jinjuan. Instantly, Perfected Lord Mingzhe's hopes were dashed. He had already sensed the unconcealable excitement and killing intent in the depths of Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen's eyes. Both of them had fervent gazes, as though they were waiting for the ignorant monk to deliver himself to them with their jaws wide open. Suddenly, Ji Yaoshua's heart skipped a beat and she asked softly, "Since he wants to release Si Junyu, why is he walking towards Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen?" Perfected Lord Mingzhe was stunned. That was right. If he wanted to release Si Junyu, he could have done so easily. Why did he have to walk towards Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen? What is he trying to do? A look of confusion flashed through Perfected Lord Mingzhe's eyes. Could it be? Chapter 600. The middle-aged monk carried Si Junyu and got closer to Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen. In the blink of an eye, they were less than 10 feet apart. Unlike the suppressed excitement in Gu Suchi and Perfected Lord Tian Chen's eyes, the middle-aged monk was extremely calm and his eyes were deep without any emotions. When he got closer, the middle-aged monk tossed Si Junyu towards Perfected Lord Tian Chen in a seemingly casual manner. Perfected Lord Tian Chen's eyes shone brightly as he reached out to catch it hurriedly. On the other side, Gu Suchi could not help but burst into laughter. Ha! All of a sudden. Gu Suchi's laughter stopped abruptly. From the corner of his eyes, he caught sight of a figure following closely behind Si Junyu. Suddenly, the figure closed in with a ferocious glint in his eyes, as though he was an ancient demon that was about to devour someone. Pust! Gu Suchi sucked in a cold breath. That middle-aged monk had the intention to kill Jining Jinjuan. How dare he? How would a mere Jin Dan realm cultivator dare to attack Jining Jinjuan? Hand over your life. Suddenly, the middle-aged monk opened his mouth and let out a suffocating killing intent. He reached out with a thick palm that covered the skies and stirred the winds. Gu Suchi merely felt his vision darken and a huge shadow loomed over his head, as though dark clouds were pressing down on him. You have a death wish. Gu Suchi gripped his sword in reverse and slashed viciously in front of him. The two of them were way too close. Before he could release his sword technique completely, Su Zimo's left hand had already gripped Gu Suchi's wrist. No matter how profound his sword technique was, it was useless at this moment. At this distance, it was a battle of melee combat strength and the strength of one's physique. Gu Suchi's expression changed starkly and a look of panic finally flashed through his eyes. His wrist was locked tightly by the middle-aged monk and he could not break free at all. It was only at this moment that he realized how frightening the middle-aged monk's physique was. The middle-aged monk's melee combat strength was enough to threaten his life. Gu Suchi was Jining Jinjuan. If it was a normal fight, he would not have given the middle-aged monk a chance to close in with his spirit consciousness and dermic powers. Given the current situation, being closed in by the middle-aged monk was equivalent to being closed in by a pure-blooded ferocious beast. If anything went wrong, they would die on the spot. Most of the cultivators were physically weak, far weaker than the demons. Therefore, cultivators would use spirit spells, spirit weapons, and other means to constantly widen the distance between them and demonic beasts to prevent them from getting close. But once a demonic beast got close to the cultivator would be in danger. Perfected Lord Tian Chen had just caught Si Junyu and was unable to help at all. At this moment, Gu Suchi could only rely on himself. The timing of the middle-aged monk's attack was simply too exquisite. Even if he had been a little faster or a little slower, it would not have resulted in such a situation. Crack! The middle-aged monk did not give Gu Suchi any time to react and directly crushed the latter's wrist. Ah! Gu Suchi cried out in pain, cold sweat dripping down instantly. Whoosh! At the same time, the middle-aged monk's sky-covering hand descended, erupting with a tragic aura that could suppress everything. Gu Suchi's wrist was crushed and his head froze for a moment. By the time he reacted, the middle-aged monk's palm had already descended on his head. In a hurry, he could only raise his arm to block. Crack! 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 In that brief collision, Gu Suchi's arm was snapped instantly by the middle-aged monk's palm. The palm did not stop there and slammed down heavily on Gu Suchi's head. Bang! Brains splattered. Gu Suchi's eyes widened and a series of cracks appeared on his face. His head was almost crushed by the middle-aged monk's palm. His essence spirit was shattered and he was deader than dead. Jining Jinjuan was dead. If Gu Suchi, who was in the center of the battlefield, could not react in time, the others were even more stunned. Be it Ji Yaoshue's side or Si Junyu's side, none of them expected the tides to change on the battlefield. In less than a single breath, Jining Jinjuan was dead. What was even more frightening was that the massacre did not stop. Demon monk, how dare you! Perfected Lord Tian Chen had just placed Si Junyu down when he saw that. In his shock, he could not help but be enraged. Why wouldn't I dare? After killing Gu Suchi, the middle-aged monk did not pause at all. With a single stride, he arrived before Perfected Lord Tian Chen and hollered, "You're the one I'm going to kill." When he heard that, Perfected Lord Mingzhe shuddered. "You're the one I'm going to kill." Those words meant that the middle-aged monk had wanted to kill the two Jining Jinjuan right from the beginning. The reason why the monk captured Si Junyu alive was not to use him as a bargaining chip for negotiations. The reason why he captured Si Junyu alive was for this moment. Right from the beginning, he had no intention of letting the two Jinyingjinjuan off. This person really had guts as big as the sky. On the battlefield, Perfected Lord Tian Chen spun the sword in his hands and aimed it at the middle-aged monk's heart, stabbing it viciously as he said coldly, "You don't know what's good for you." The sword beam was sharp, enough to destroy everything. That was Jinyingjinjuan's dermic weapon. Although the middle-aged monk's physique was strong and he could snap superior-grade spirit weapons with a single finger, he could not withstand the sharpness of a dermic weapon. Against the sharpness of a sword cultivator, he could only retreat. However, the moment he retreated, the distance between them would increase and he would no longer have the chance to kill Jinyingjinjuan. OM. A resolute look flashed through the middle-aged monk's eyes as he chanted Sanskrit. The voids trembled. Perfected Lord Tian Chen's sword paused for a moment. However, that slight pause was imperceptible and had almost no effect. The middle-aged monk did not slow down and merely tilted his body slightly, continuing to lunge towards Perfected Lord Tian Chen. Exclamation point. Although the sword that was initially aimed at his heart deviated slightly, it still pierced the middle-aged monk's chest viciously. A flash of blood appeared. The middle-aged monk was oblivious and his eyes shone fiercely as he continued charging forward despite the piercing of the sword. Perfected Lord Ming Zhe and the others could clearly see a bloodied sword protruding from the back of the middle-aged monk. Although the sword did not manage to pierce the middle-aged monk's heart, however, the sword was merely inches away from the heart. As long as Perfected Lord Tian Chen flicked his wrist, the sword would be enough to crush the middle-aged monk's heart. Right then, the middle-aged monk endured the piercing of the sword and arrived before Perfected Lord Tian Chen, swinging his arm. Although the arm looked limp, it resembled the trunk of an ancient divine elephant. With a thud, it let out a crisp sound in midair and coiled around Perfected Lord Tian Chen's head, flinging it viciously. Crack! 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 Perfected Lord Tian Chen's head spun a couple of times on his neck before coming to a stop. His eyeballs bulged and he had long stopped breathing. Victory was clear. Life and death were decided. Perfected Lord Tian Chen's neck had long been shattered against that power. His brain was also turned into mush by the shock and his essence spirit was destroyed. Right before his death, he gripped the hilt of his sword tightly with his palm. However, he was still too slow and did not manage to crush the middle-aged monk's heart. This was the edge of melee combat. If he was a single step slower, even if it was just a split second, one would live and the other would die. Life and death were decided in that split second. Perfected Lord Ming Zhe could not believe how the middle-aged monk would be feeling just now right in the middle of the battlefield. Even though he was an outsider, he was already drenched in cold sweat from nervousness. This was truly a gamble. If Perfected Lord Tian Chen was a single step faster, the middle-aged monk would be the one lying on the ground right now. However, on second thought, it seemed like that was the only choice and decision that could kill Perfected Lord Tian Chen. What a frightening monk. Just who is he? Perfected Lord Ming Zhe looked at the back view of the middle-aged monk and felt more fear than shock. Chapter 601. The middle-aged monk was none other than Su Zimo, who had changed his appearance. At this moment, there was no way he could reveal his true appearance. If anyone were to find out that he was not dead and even saved the Emperor of Great Zhou, the Great Zhou dynasty would definitely be in trouble. There was a high chance that the old temple at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley could not be hidden as well. Furthermore, in the depths of Su Zimo's heart, he did not dare to face Ji Yaoxue. That had been the case for the past 5 years. It was a complicated emotion that was indescribable. For the past 5 years, Su Zimo stayed in the old temple at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley, isolated from the world and away from the hustle and bustle of life. He did not fight or kill, merely reciting sutras and paying respects to Buddha daily with a peaceful state of mind. However, when he heard that Ji Yaoshue was in danger, he became nervous instantly. The peace of the past 5 years was shattered instantly and his killing intent surged uncontrollably. That was the reason why he had no intention of letting anyone off the moment he appeared. Even perfected Lord Ming-Zhe was fearful of his decisiveness to kill. The entire process of killing the 2 Jinying Jinjuan took less than 3 breaths. Although it seemed short and simple, he was the only one who knew the dangers involved. He was truly risking his life. As long as there was the slightest mistake, he would die here. In terms of strength, Su Zimo was far from being a match for Jinying Jinjuan. The only thing he was stronger than Gu Suqi and the other man was his physique. Dai Yu had once said that it was easiest for demon cultivators to kill opponents above their level. They only had a chance of winning in melee combat. In reality, the reason why he agreed to let Si Junyu off was to numb Gu Suqi and the other man so that they would let down their guard. However, the reason why the 2 Jinying Jinjuan were caught off guard was not because they were inexperienced. They truly had not expected that a Jin Dan realm cultivator would have the guts to kill Jinying Jinjuan. That was equivalent to a mortal killing an immortal. Su Zimo gripped the hilt of his sword in reverse and pulled it out slowly from his chest. The sharp sword scraped against his bones and flesh, letting out a shuddering sound. Su Zimo was expressionless. An arrow of blood spurted out. Su Zimo didn't seem to feel any pain. Without even looking, he swung his hand behind him. Puff! A sword cultivator from the Heavenly Piercing Sword sect had his heart pierced by a sword and died on the spot. The remaining 4 people finally reacted. They were so scared that their faces turned pale. They screamed and ran away without looking back. Su Zimo clutched his chest with his left hand. His eyes were cold as he stomped his foot, causing the ground to shake violently. His entire body shot out like an arrow. The speed was too fast. Bang! Just as a great Xia guard ran a few steps, Su Zimo caught up with him and killed him with a single palm strike. The guard had no power to resist. The remaining 3 perfected Jin Dan did not manage to escape far before they were all killed by Su Zimo. Si Junyu stood where he was, not moving an inch. He could tell clearly that given his strength, he wouldn't be able to escape the pursuit of the middle-aged monk even if he escaped. Before long, the middle-aged monk returned from not far away after killing the 4 of them and headed straight for him. Si Junyu's face was pale as he forced himself to remain calm. Cupping his fists, he said, "Esteemed monk, I'm a prince of the great Xia dynasty. As long as you're willing to let me live, I'll be eternally grateful and will accept any conditions in exchange. As long as I ascend to the throne of the emperor, it won't be a problem even if the entire country helps you, esteemed monk." Su Zimo arrived before Si Junyu with an indifferent expression. Reaching out, he gripped Si Junyu's throat and pulled him over. Ugh, ugh. Si Junyu's eyes rolled back and his feet left the ground, kicking wildly. He could not speak and could only make strange sounds. Su Zimo whispered in Si Junyu's ears, "Even if you have the entire country, you won't be able to match a 10,000th of her. If you dare to touch her, I'll kill you." You, Si Junyu's face was purplish, as though he wanted to ask something. Su Zimo continued, "I'll let you die with a clear understanding today. I'm Su Zimo and I'm the one who killed your brother, Jun Hao." Si Junyu's eyes widened in disbelief. Su Zimo. That was a name that no one had mentioned for 5 years. This man was not dead. Go down and accompany your brother. Su Zimo's tone was calm as he exerted strength in his fingers. With a snap, he crushed Si Junyu's throat. Si Junyu was dead. In less than 15 minutes, 2 Jinying Jinjuan, 20 perfected Jin Dan and a prince of Great Xia were all buried here, none of them were spared. No one knew what Ji Yaoshue was thinking as she frowned slightly and looked at Su Zimo with a strange gaze. Perfected Lord Mingzhe took a deep breath of air and walked forward, bowing deeply towards Su Zimo. I'm Perfected Lord Mingzhe of the Great Zhou Dynasty. Thank you for saving us, esteemed monk. As a Jining Jinjuan, it was truly rare for him to be so courteous towards a perfected Jin Dan. It's fine, Su Zimo waved it off and said indifferently, this place is filled with danger and the Dragon Burial Valley is an ominous place. Don't come here again in the future. Alright, thank you for your guidance, esteemed monk, Perfected Lord Mingzhe nodded. Right then, Ji Yaoshue walked over as well and glared at Su Zimo, asking, may I know your dermic name and which sect you are from, esteemed monk? That was an unreasonable question. It was more like a questioning tone and attitude. Perfected Lord Mingzhe glanced at Ji Yaoshue and frowned slightly. He could sense that this middle-aged monk had a mysterious background and was a little strange in his actions. Even now, he had not mentioned why he saved them and even killed everyone from the Great Xia dynasty. However, Ji Yaoshue seemed even stranger at that moment. Su Zimo lowered his gaze and took down a prayer bead with 4 Buddha beads from his left wrist. He lowered his gaze and said calmly, my dermic name is Ming Xian and I'm not from any sect. Ming Xian, Ji Yaoshue murmured softly and looked deeply at Su Zimo. Perfected Lord Mingzhe and I are injured and can't fight anymore. Since esteemed monk said that this place is extremely dangerous, I wonder if you can send us out. That was an even more rude request. Just as Perfected Lord Mingzhe was about to speak, the middle-aged monk went silent for a moment before nodding. All right. Perfected Lord Mingzhe was stunned. However, Ji Yaoshue smiled sweetly. Thank you, esteemed monk. For the past 5 years, Perfected Lord Mingzhe had been by Ji Yaoshue's side to protect her. Ever since the death of the strongest monster incarnate in history 5 years ago, Perfected Lord Mingzhe had never seen such a smile on Ji Yaoshue's face before. It was dazzling like the rosy clouds after the rain. It was as though all the sorrow that had settled in this woman's heart for the past 5 years had vanished without a trace. When he looked at Ji Yaoshue's smile, 2 words appeared in Su Zimo's mind. Her smile was like a flower. However, there was no flower in this world that could compare to the smile of this woman before him. Su Zimo averted his gaze and moved the prayer beads even faster. He lowered his gaze and led the way, saying softly, let's go. Perfected Lord Mingzhe was confused and followed behind instinctively. Ji Yaoshue pursed her lips and her eyes dimmed. However, she smiled before long. No matter what, today was a happy day. Chapter 602. 3 strange people appeared in the Great Qian ruins. The leader was a middle-aged monk with prayer beads. He had a calm expression and did not seem like he had any cultivation, no different from a mortal. Behind him was a man and a woman, both of whom were heavily injured. There was a high chance that the 3 of them would be ambushed if they appeared in the Great Qian ruins. It was way too common to kill for treasures here. However, along the way, many cultivators avoided them and did not provoke them when they caught sight of them. That was because everyone could clearly see that there were initially countless otherworldly soldiers in the palace. However, when the 3 of them passed by, the otherworldly soldiers chose to avoid them. Even though the 3 of them passed through the palace, none of the otherworldly soldiers dared to approach them. Perfected Lord Mingzhe was secretly amazed. The reason why the otherworldly soldiers were wary was definitely not because of him. When they arrived, even if he was Jining Jinjuan, the otherworldly soldiers charged forward fearlessly. Who would have thought that the otherworldly soldiers and horses would avoid this middle-aged monk? The middle-aged monk seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist that prevented one from seeing through him. The strangest thing was his identity. Although he was a cultivator, there was no spirit energy fluctuation within his body. Although he was a mortal, he was able to kill Jining Zhenjuan. This person specialized in a sound wave secret skill. Those that possessed the legacy of sound wave secret skills were all super sects or top factions. However, none of the 6 Buddhist monasteries were in the north region. Where did this person come from? Along the way, perfected Lord Mingzhe was filled with questions, but he could not figure it out. Ji Yaoxue followed behind and looked at the back view of the middle-aged monk with a conflicted expression. There were a few times when she wanted to say something, but eventually, she did not. Just like that, the 3 of them passed through the palace and the ruins silently. After sending Ji Yaoxue and perfected Lord Mingzhe out of the ruins, Su Zimo stopped in his tracks and turned around. Lowering his head, he whispered, "Patrons, please leave as soon as possible. I'll take my leave first." Ji Yaoxue bit her red lips gently without saying anything. "Thank you for your rescue, esteemed monk. I'll definitely remember your kindness today." Perfected Lord Mingzhe cupped his fists hurriedly. Su Zimo nodded and bowed with a single hand before turning to leave. Right from the beginning, he did not dare to look into Ji Yaoxue's eyes. He did not dare to meet her gaze. After hesitating for a long time, Ji Yaoxue still asked, "Reverend, don't you have anything else to say? This place is dangerous. Benefactor, please don't come here again." With his back facing Ji Yaoxue, Su Zimo continued forward without turning back as he said calmly, "When will I be able to meet you again?" Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo paused in his tracks and remained silent for a long time before replying, "We'll meet again if fate allows." Perfected Lord Mingzhe furrowed his brows and looked back and forth between Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo and the middle-aged monk in confusion. Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo heaved a long sigh of relief after the middle-aged monk's figure vanished at the end of the ruins. "Uncle Ming, let's return." Perfected Lord Mingzhe could not help but ask, "Do you know that person, Empress? Ming Xen?" Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo smiled and shook her head. "No, I don't." Perfected Lord Mingzhe was even more confused. This was not the territory of Great Zhou and both of them were injured. None of them dared to linger and soared into the air on their swords, speeding away. Su Zimo returned with mixed emotions. In the end, he did not choose to acknowledge Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo. He did not know what he should say. How should he face Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo? He could not deny that Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo was extremely important to him. However, he would eventually have to leave the North region and even Tianhuang mainland. As for Ji Yaoxue Su Zimo, she was the Empress of Great Zhou and bore the hopes of the dynasty's prosperity. Both of them had different paths. Suddenly, Su Zimo paused in his tracks and frowned. He was deep in thought along the way and was distracted. He did not notice that someone was tailing him. Of course, that person did not seem to have any ill intentions towards him. Otherwise, given his spirit perception, he would have been able to sense it even if he was distracted. "Who are you? Come on out." Su Zimo glanced sideways and said indifferently, "Great monk, do you recognize me?" A gentle voice rang out, carrying a hint of reproach and a hint of resentment. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. Instantly, the Sanskrit of the Daming mantra echoed in his mind and he calmed down swiftly. It was Demoness Ji. After 5 years, Demoness Ji's bewitchment skills had become even more frightening. If not for the fact that Su Zimo had chanted sutras and gained some understanding of Buddhism over the past 5 years, he would have been exposed with that voice alone. It seemed like Demoness Ji had gained quite a bit of benefits in the human emperor's palace back then and her cultivation had improved tremendously. Su Zimo turned around and looked at Demoness Ji who was not far away. After 5 years, Demoness Ji seemed to have slimmed down a little. However, that could not hide her alluring beauty and seductive figure. She furrowed her brows in a pitiful manner. Her eyes were clear like water and sparkled. The young girl bit her alluring red lips gently with a resentful expression. Su Zimo took a glance and retracted his gaze without batting an eyelid, shaking his head. I don't know you. Great monk, you don't know me but I know you. A fragrance wafted over as Ji Yaoshue pounced towards Su Zimo with light steps. By the looks of it, she seemed like she wanted to dive into his embrace. Su Zimo felt his head ache. The person he was most afraid of in his life was this demoness before him. In a flash, Su Zimo dodged to the side. Female patron, please respect yourself. Su Zimo placed his palms together and said in a deep voice. Sure, demoness Ji harumphed and said angrily, Great monk, you're asking me to respect myself now. Back in the stone coffin, you took advantage of me quite a bit. Su Zimo's mouth twitched. Back then, the two of them were forced to squeeze into a stone coffin and escape into the underground river. The stone coffin was cramped and did not have much space, it was inevitable for the two of them to touch each other. Now that demoness Ji mentioned that, it was clear that she had recognized his identity. Demoness Ji was relentless and continued, Alright, you shaved your hair and took a prayer bead. Now, you're going to turn around and deny me? Initially, Su Zimo was still hesitating about whether he should admit it. After all, there was nothing demoness Ji could do if he refused to admit it. However, the more she spoke, the worse it sounded as though there was truly something between the two of them. Su Zimo could not bear to continue listening and could not help but cough gently, interrupting, Demoness Ji, what do you want? Humph. She raised her head and pouted. Monk, I thought you didn't recognize me. After a moment of silence, Su Zimo said, 5 years ago, thank you and the Pure Maiden sect for saving the people of the Yen Kingdom. When she heard that, Demoness Ji's eyes turned misty as though she was about to cry. Su Zimo, you're so heartless. Why aren't you showing yourself when you're clearly alive? I, Jean Dan, have been crippled. I've been mistaken for a demon and offended the entire northern domain. Anyone who has anything to do with me won't have a good ending. Su Zimo shook his head and said, not to mention that I'll be pursued the moment I make an appearance. Even though the northern territory is huge, there's no place for me to stay. Chapter 603. When Demoness Ji saw Su Zimo's desolate expression, she suddenly recalled his situation and could not bear to blame him. His family and friends were all in the north region. If not for the fact that he had no other choice, why would he choose to hide from the world? Furthermore, his Jean Dan was crippled. He was once so dazzling as an extreme foundation establishment cultivator and the second human emperor. He suppressed the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects in the human emperor's palace and swept through all the heroes of the north region. He incinerated Jining Jinjuan and was known as the #1 monster incarnate in history. But now, he had fallen from his pedestal and had nothing left. In fact, he did not even have a place to stay. Who would be able to understand and endure such a blow? Initially, Demoness Ji was filled with resentment. However, when she heard Su Zimo's words, she felt her heart ache. She said gently, Zimo, you can come to Pure Maiden sect. We'll protect you. Protect a demon, huh? Su Zimo laughed self-deprecatingly. Demoness Ji opened her mouth, wanting to say something. However, she did not say anything in the end. She could not care about anything, but she could not guarantee that her sect would be the same. Although Pure Maiden sect was a fiend sect, they were humans after all. The feud between humans and demons had been going on for a long time. Unless one party signed a blood oath, there was no way the other party would accept the other party. Demoness Ji said, Zimo, you can explain. You're not a demon at all and the human emperor's palace will not allow demons to enter. Su Zimo sneered and shook his head. Given his personality and pride, there was no way he would explain something as such. In other words, even if he was willing to explain, who would believe him? If he could enter the human emperor's palace, there was no way he was a demon. That was the simplest logic that anyone could understand. It was just that some people were pretending to be confused. The truth was no longer important. What was important was that the entire North region wanted Su Zimo dead. If they said that he was a demon, he was a demon. If they said that he was a fiend, he was a fiend. It was useless no matter what he said. What are your plans from now on? Are you going to hide forever? Demoness G asked. I'm waiting for an opportunity. Su Zimo said slowly, when I appear, it will also be time to leave the northern region. Leave the north region? She frowned slightly. The north region was too big, and danger was everywhere. Not to mention that Su Zimo's Jean Dan was already crippled. Even if he was in his peak condition, it would be unrealistic for him to cross the northern region unscathed. Her heart skipped a beat as she thought of a possibility and blurted out, the ancient battlefield. Not bad. Su Zimo nodded. In another 15 years, the intermediate ancient battlefield would open. As long as they could enter the intermediate ancient battlefield, they would be able to head to other regions or even the middle continent through the space nodes of other regions of the infinite mainland, just like Xiaoning and Leng Ro. This time, Su Zimo intended to leave with his elder brother, Su Hong. Before this, Ji Yaoshue had said that Su Hong's health was deteriorating. The blow to Su Hong after learning of his death and the calamity that befell the citizens of Yan country was unimaginable. Furthermore, Su Hong had failed to assassinate the king of Yan, Zhao Qian, and was constantly injured. Su Zimo did not know how much longer his elder brother could last. After all, Su Hong was not a cultivator and his lifespan was limited. In another 15 years, Su Hong would be in his 60s and would only have slightly more than 40 years of lifespan left. Su Zimo wanted to bring Su Hong with him to the middle continent to look for Xiaoning. The siblings had to be by Su Hong's side in his final moments. Furthermore, ever since Xiaoning left Pingyang town and joined Azure Frost sect with Ji Yaoshue, Su Hong and Xiaoning had not seen each other again. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed. The main reason why Xiaoning entered cultivation and focused on elixir refinement, even heading to Elixir Yang sect to cultivate, was to extend Su Hong's life. It would be best if they could find a way to extend Su Hong's lifespan by the time they met. Have you truly made up your mind to leave? Demoness Ji could not conceal the disappointment in her eyes. Her expression was dim as she whispered, why would I? What about my sister? Su Zimo was silent. My sister knows you so well. If even I can recognize you, she must have recognized you long ago. Demoness Ji sighed gently. It's just that she understands you and your difficulties. That's why she didn't force you or expose you. It's good that she recognized me. At the very least, she knows that I'm still alive and doesn't have to worry about me, Su Zimo said. After a moment of silence, Su Zimo continued, after you return this time round, pay more attention to the people around Yaoshue. As the Empress, her movements must be extremely secretive. I suspect that someone doesn't want her to return alive after being ambushed here. Don't worry, I'll do my best to help my sister. Silence fell between the two of them. Demoness Ji did not say anything and merely looked at Su Zimo quietly. A long time later, Su Zimo said softly, let's go back. Then, take care of yourself. Demoness Ji was in low spirits and her eyes were bloodshot with a sad expression. A moment later, she sniffed and forced out a smile, pretending to be carefree. Let's have one last hug as a farewell. Su Zimo hesitated for a moment before nodding. He walked forward and gave Demoness Ji a symbolic hug. A sly look flashed through her eyes as she turned around and pecked Su Zimo gently on the cheek with her red lips. Su Zimo was stunned. Her black hair brushed against his face and her fragrance wafted over. Demoness Ji had already turned to flee. He. Demoness Ji laughed and her eyes curved into crescents. She was overjoyed and did not seem disappointed at all. Damned demoness. Su Zimo grit his teeth. You're so stupid. Demoness G made a funny face at Su Zimo with disdain and pouted her lips. Leave if you want. I don't care. How can I let you off so easily when you took advantage of me in the stone coffin previously? Humph, just now, I'm only collecting some interest. Demoness G waved her fist. Without saying anything, Su Zimo turned to leave. With his back facing Demoness G, he could not see the sadness and reluctance in the depths of her eyes. Even after he disappeared at the end of the ruins, a woman in pink remained standing there, looking in his direction and refusing to leave for a long time. Su Zimo returned to the old temple and entered. Ming Zhen was chanting sutras in the courtyard. When he saw Su Zimo enter, he could not help but exclaim softly with a surprised expression. Little junior brother, you're injured? Ming Zhen asked. I'm fine. Su Zimo's chest was pierced by a sword. However, the wound had already healed in a short period of time. With a grim expression, Ming Zhen closed in and glared at Su Zimo's cheeks. He even sniffed and said in a deep voice, Not good, there are 2 red marks on your cheeks and there's a faint fragrance. Little junior brother, you've been poisoned. That was the lipstick mark left behind by Demoness G, and Su Zimo had forgotten to wipe it off. Ming Zhen had not even seen a woman at the bottom of the Dragon Burial Valley and naturally did not know what it was. Su Zimo's face darkened and he pushed Ming Zhen's bald head away, barking hatefully, Hit your head. Su Zimo wiped the lipstick mark on his cheeks as he entered the sutra chamber. Ming Zhen looked at the old monk with a confused expression and asked seriously, Master, why is little junior brother angry? The old monk replied, Perhaps, he's poisoned. See, I told you. Little junior brother didn't believe me. Ming Zhen pouted. Chapter 604. Night fell. Su Zimo tidied his clothes and left the sutra chamber, heading towards the backyard. Every month on this day, he would head to the red-headed ghost's place to drink a bowl of mysterious spirit water. Under the cover of the night, the backyard of the old temple looked extremely sinister. The red-headed ghost sat on the ground boldly, leaning against a tombstone with a bowl of spirit water in front of him. He had been waiting for a long time. Su Zimo was already familiar with everything as he arrived before the red-headed ghost and drank the spirit water. Suddenly, the red-headed ghost said, You have a bow on you, right? Take it out and place it there. The red-headed ghost pointed to a tombstone not far away. Su Zimo was puzzled. However, he took out the moon concealment bow and hung it on the tombstone as instructed. The full moon had just risen and the cold moonlight shone down, forming a beam of light that landed on the tombstone and the moon concealment bow. The bow shone brightly. Even without the infusion of spirit energy, the spirit patterns on the bow shone with a bedazzling brilliance. The red-headed ghost said, This bow is a quasi-connate spirit weapon to begin with and its 6th connate spirit pattern is already formed. As long as it receives the baptism of the moonlight here, it will definitely grow into a true connate spirit weapon. Su Zimo nodded. You have a blood-red saber on you as well. Take it out as well. Blood Quencher. Su Zimo was stunned. Blood Quencher was a perfect spirit weapon that he refined personally and was not a quasi-connate spirit weapon. Could it be? Although Su Zimo was puzzled, he still handed Blood Quencher over. The red-headed ghost received Blood Quencher and caressed it gently before nodding. This saber was tempered rather well. When it was formed, it was fused with a frightening bloodline, giving it a bloodthirsty nature. Back then, Blood Quencher almost failed. At the final juncture, Su Zimo used his bloodline to quench it and create it. The fact that the red-headed ghost could make a rough guess despite not witnessing it personally was proof of his sharp eyesight. The red-headed ghost stood up and came to an empty spot not far away. Exerting strength with his backhand, he stabbed Blood Quencher into the ground, leaving only the hilt exposed. Red-headed ghost, what are you doing? Su Zimo asked curiously. The red-headed ghost said, the experts buried here are all experts from 10,000 years ago. The bloodline underground is incomparably strong and hasn't decayed for 10,000 years, possessing immense might. If you soak the saber in it, there's a chance that it could grow into an Khanate spirit weapon. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. With that, apart from the coiling dragon seal and black gold arrow, he had two more Khanate spirit weapons, Moon Concealment Bow and Blood Quencher. Unfortunately, just as the mystic gold silk armor was repaired, it was shattered by Xuanyu Daoren. Too many experts are buried in this mausoleum. Old ancestors have fallen and emperors have shed their blood. It is a place of great danger. It's fine if there's nothing going on with this saber. However, if it can truly grow into a Khanate spirit weapon, it'll definitely be a supreme weapon. The red-headed ghost glared at Blood Quencher coldly and chuckled. Those who aren't strong enough will definitely be in trouble if they obtain this saber. You've got to be careful as well. At that moment, the massive amount of energy in the spirit water had already spread through Su Zimo's body. Su Zimo assumed a lotus position and began cultivating. The mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness reverberated through his mind. As he breathed, rich demonic chi spewed out of his mouth and nostrils. There were no longer any cracks on his blood-red inner core, it was restored to normal. His inner core circulated slowly and demonic chi surged, conjuring ancient demons one after another around him. Su Zimo was within and his eyes were tightly shut. His figure was faintly discernible and his aura was terrifying, he was like the king of all demons that had descended upon the world. For the past 5 years, his inner core had only been able to heal because of this mysterious spirit water. Not only that, his body had become even more frightening as well. Although it was just a bowl of spirit water, the amount of energy it contained was enough for Su Zimo to absorb for an entire month. If he continued cultivating, his inner core would definitely be at greater mastery in another 15 years. In fact, he might even be able to cultivate it to perfected realm. What sort of spirit water is this? How can it possess such power? For the past 5 years, Su Zimo had browsed through many ancient books in the Sutra Chamber. However, he did not see any records that matched the description. During this period of time, he had asked the red-headed ghost that question more than once. Each time, the red-headed ghost would have a strange expression and stare at him with a malicious smile without saying anything. Thereafter, Su Zimo did not ask anymore. The night gradually darkened and the full moon hung high in the sky. The red-headed ghost glared at Su Zimo's figure with a look of envy in the depths of his eyes. This cultivation technique is truly terrifying. The red-headed ghost lamented internally. It was an undeniable fact that humans were born weak. However, this cultivation technique of the demon race was able to cultivate a mortal body to such a frightening extent. In his vision, each time Su Zimo breathed, his flesh and blood would squirm imperceptibly. His tendons would tremble slightly, his bones would tremble and his blood marrow would flow noisily. His 7 orifices would shine with a bedazzling divine light that was even brighter than the stars. Each time he breathed, his flesh, tendons, bones, skin, organs, orifices and blood were refined. The red-headed ghost's gaze landed on Su Zimo's exposed skin. As his cultivation deepened, the surface of Su Zimo's skin seemed to have turned rougher. Upon closer inspection, one could vaguely see diamond-shaped marks on the surface of his skin that were intertwined, arranged neatly and tightly. However, the marks were not obvious and even Su Zimo himself did not notice them. When he saw those marks, the red-headed ghost was delighted and could not conceal the joy in his eyes. Before long, the night passed. When the first glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and the demonic chi that surged around him surged into his body. In the blink of an eye, it vanished without a trace. Su Zimo opened his eyes and a demonic glint flashed through them. The red-headed ghost asked in a seemingly casual manner, "You've devoured something from dragons in the past, right?" Su Zimo was shocked. His first reaction was to think of the gigantic dragon egg. Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Yes, back in the human emperor's palace, in order to cultivate the cultivation technique left behind by the human emperor, I consumed an elixir made from the flesh of dragons." Only a single elixir? The red-headed ghost raised his brow. After thinking for a moment, Su Zimo realized that there was nothing to hide and said, "I even consumed half a dragon egg in a primordial ruin previously." Suddenly, a glint shone in the red-headed ghost's eyes before disappearing swiftly. "Hee, you've got guts," the red-headed ghost said with a fake smile with a playful tone. Sensing that something was amiss, Su Zimo frowned and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I was just asking." The red-headed ghost waved it off with an indifferent expression. Su Zimo could not tell anything from the red-headed ghost's face and patted his body, preparing to leave. Don't be hasty." Right then, the red-headed ghost gestured for Su Zimo to sit down and said with a smile, "Today, I'll teach you something." Chapter 605. Although the red-headed ghost knew a lot of things after 5 years of interaction, he had never taken the initiative to impart anything to Su Zimo. Now that this was suddenly mentioned, Su Zimo was truly curious. Right from the beginning, the red-headed ghost did not mention a single word about his background. Su Zimo truly wanted to see what capabilities the red-headed ghost had. Su Zimo coughed gently. "Let me say this first, I'm not going to learn the petty tricks of you ghosts." When he heard the word ghost, the red-headed ghost's mouth twitched, as though he was about to fly into a rage. However, on second thought, he chuckled gloatingly. At that moment, the sun had just risen. A ray of sunlight shone through the cemetery, dispelling some of the gloominess and sinister aura. The red-headed ghost narrowed his eyes at the rising sun that had just appeared, and a strange white light danced in his right eye. As time passed by, the light intensified and endless sunlight surged in. His right eye turned completely white and shone with a blazing light. The red-headed ghost's right eye seemed to have formed a connection with the blazing sun in the horizon. Su Zimo merely took a casual glance and felt a piercing pain in his eyes. Instantly, 2 streams of tears flowed down. Su Zimo was shocked and closed his eyes hurriedly, not daring to look. How scary! He cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness all year round, and his divine eye orifices were opened with extremely strong eyesight. Back in the ancient battlefield, even the paragons of Diamond Monastery released their sect's secret skill, enraged Diamond Gaze, could not shake his mind. To think that his eyes would suffer such an impact from a single side glance. If he were to meet the red-headed ghost's gaze, his eyes would most likely go blind. The most frightening thing was that even with his eyes closed, Su Zimo could still sense the power released by the red-headed ghost's right eye. It was extremely strong and dazzling. His right eye seemed to have turned into a blazing sun. Beside the red-headed ghost, Su Zimo felt as though he could melt and turn into ashes at any moment. How could this be? A question arose in Su Zimo's mind. Such a hot, masculine energy was the most effective against ghosts. Even spirits and ghosts would avoid it at all costs. How did the red-headed ghost know such a method? Could it be that he was not a ghost? At this moment, Su Zimo suddenly felt a sharp pain in his right eye. It was as if something was about to fall out of his eyes. Even if he closed his eyes, it would be difficult to stop it. "Ah!" Su Zimo cried out in pain. His right eye was so swollen that it felt like it was going to explode. Su Zimo's entire body trembled. Unable to hold on any longer, he opened his eyes once more. His right eye had also strangely turned white. Their eyes were all white. There seemed to be something floating inside and fusing with his right eye. The glow in the red-headed ghost's right eye faded, but he continued to stare at Su Zimo's right eye and nodded to himself. Indeed. The red-headed ghost curled his finger. A pebble slowly fell out of Su Zimo's right eye. It was as white as jade and shone with a crystalline luster as it hovered in midair. The swelling feeling in his eyes disappeared. Su Zimo slumped to the ground weakly as though he was relieved of a burden, panting heavily. That stone, Su Zimo frowned and recalled something. Back at the cold lake in Sang Lang mountain range, he saw Haka Dojin who was on the brink of death. At that time, that stone was placed beside Haka Dojin. According to Haka Dojin, that white stone was brought out from a ruin and could not be stored in a storage bag. He did not know what use it had either. When Su Zimo picked it up, the stone disappeared mysteriously. Immediately after, he felt a sharp pain in his mind and nearly fainted. Thereafter, a secret skill appeared in his mind, the candlelight sword formation. At that time, he had a feeling. The stone seemed to have burrowed into his body. To think that it would fall out of his right eye now. The red-headed ghost pinched the white stone between his fingers and rubbed it gently with a nostalgic expression, as though he was holding on to an incredible treasure. What's that? Su Zimo could not help but ask. Legend has it that in the depths of the universe, before life was born, it was chaos. As time passed, Yin and Yang were born from the chaos. The extreme of Yang is the great Yang, the extreme of Yin is the great Yin. The power of great Yang and great Yin converged continuously, forming two terrifying existences known as the candlelight and nether glow. The red-headed ghost's voice sounded as though it had traveled from the primordial era and was recounting ancient secrets. The power of the candlelight and nether glow was way too terrifying. It enveloped the universe and extended through the 3,000 worlds. The sun and moon of Tianhuang mainland were formed from a trace of the power of the candlelight and nether glow respectively. A trace of power? Su Zimo was shocked. Be it the sun or moon, the power they contained was something that Su Zimo could not touch given his current cultivation realm. He could only consume the essence of the sun and moon to cultivate after cultivating an essence spirit and becoming a fiend demon. The power of the sun and moon was vast and endless. But now, the red-headed ghost was saying that the sun and moon above their heads were merely formed from a trace of the power of two terrifying existences. The red-headed ghost smiled. The universe is way too vast, so vast that you can't imagine it. There are billions of existences like Tianhuang mainland. In other words, there are billions of suns and moons like the one you're seeing right now. Su Zimo was dumbfounded. The red-headed ghost's words had completely overturned his understanding of the world. The red-headed ghost pondered for a moment before continuing, of course, these are merely legends that no one can verify. Or rather, the person who can verify it is not even in Tianhuang mainland and has ascended to the upper world a long time ago. Pausing for a moment, the red-headed ghost looked at Su Zimo meaningfully. That red-robed woman definitely knows about this. Su Zimo remained silent. The red-headed ghost stared at Su Zimo for a long time before suddenly closing in. His eyes burned with the flames of gossip as he asked curiously, "Little monk, what's your relationship with that woman? Why is she helping you so much?" This was a question that the red-headed ghost had been holding back for 5 years. Now, he finally asked. Su Zimo was stunned. Master and disciple? On the surface, the two of them looked like master and disciple. However, Su Zimo had never acknowledged anyone as his master. In the depths of his heart, he did not want to admit that they were master and disciple. Friend? Well, not really. Benefactor? Sort of. That question stumped Su Zimo for a moment. Hurry and tell me. You're suffocating me. The red-headed ghost scratched his head anxiously at the side, feeling terrible. After pondering for a long time, Su Zimo said slowly, "She should be my Tao companion from now on." The red-headed ghost shuddered and his mouth was agape as his eyes widened. Thud. The pebble in his hand and the red-headed ghost's jaw fell to the ground at the same time. A moment later, the red-headed ghost gulped and looked at Su Zimo with a different gaze as he praised, "Little monk, you're truly gutsy." Chapter 606. Su Zimo pointed to the white cobblestone on the ground and asked, "What has this stone got to do with the illumination and nether glow that you mentioned?" After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo continued, "I once obtained a secret skill from this stone called the illumination sword formation." "There's no mistake," the red-headed ghost nodded. "This should be the legendary illumination stone." "Illumination stone?" Su Zimo frowned. The red-headed ghost said, "There are different versions of where the illumination stone came from and how it was formed. Some say that it was formed from the gathering of the supreme yang power of a world. Others say that it's dust that was peeled off from the illumination stone. However, it's undeniable that the illumination stone is indeed related to the illumination stone. The illumination sword formation that you comprehended should be a secret skill that someone comprehended using the illumination stone." Su Zimo was deep in thought. Indeed, his illumination sword formation was like a blazing sun when it was released. Sword chi burst forth like a blazing sun. The red-headed ghost continued, "The secret skill that I'm going to impart to you has something to do with the illumination stone as well. Back then, the owner of this secret skill comprehended it through the illumination stone as well. It's a visual technique." Visual technique. Su Zimo's eyes lit up. Visual techniques were also secret skills used to refine one's eyes. Be it immortals, Buddhas, fiends, demons or humans, eye refinement techniques were the most precious, rarest inheritances. That was because the eyes of all races were the weakest parts of their bodies. Be it tempering one's flesh or tendons and bones, as long as there was a problem in cultivation, even if one was covered in injuries or fractured tendons and bones, one could adjust in time and recover completely. However, if one's eyes were not refined correctly, there would be huge problems and they would go blind. Eyes were way too fragile. Mortals would close their eyes instinctively when the wind blew. They would feel uncomfortable even if a grain of sand entered their eyes, let alone cultivate. The reason why visual techniques were rare and precious was because not many people would dare to joke with their eyes and create secret skills. If there were any mistakes in the process, they would go blind before the secret skill was created. Although the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness was powerful, it did not contain any legacies to cultivate the eyes. All the ocular techniques in the cultivation world had different strengths and were targeted in different directions. The more famous ones were the Eye of Enchantment, the Vajra Glare, and the Fiery Golden Eyes. Cultivators who knew eye techniques were definitely a level higher than their peers in terms of combat prowess. This was because eye techniques were instantaneous and were the hardest to defend against. Although it was a good thing to be able to cultivate eye techniques, there was no joy in Su Zimo's eyes. Red-headed ghost, my Jean Dan is already crippled. I can't store spirit energy in my body. How am I supposed to cultivate eye techniques? Su Zimo asked with a frown. The red-headed ghost waved it off casually. It's fine. The cultivation of this visual technique doesn't require spirit energy. No need for spiritual power. Su Zimo was stunned. Unless a cultivator stepped into the nascent soul realm and cultivated a primordial spirit, they would be able to control dharmic powers to cultivate. Otherwise, any spirit art or secret technique that a cultivator cultivated would require spirit energy. This was the foundation. How could there be a secret technique that didn't require spiritual energy to cultivate? Unless it was a secret technique that did not belong to the human race. For example, Su Zimo's demonic cultivation did not require spirit energy as a foundation. Frowning, Su Zimo asked, if I don't require spirit energy to cultivate, what do I need? No matter the type of cultivation, power would not be produced out of thin air. Demonic cultivation required the consumption of flesh and blood. Cultivation required the absorption of spirit chi into one's body. If one wanted to cultivate eye techniques, they would have to make use of certain things to refine their eyes. The red-headed ghost glared at the rising sun that was getting hotter not far away and said coolly, "Use it to cultivate." Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Make use of the blazing sun to cultivate his eyes? Ordinary cultivators could not stare at the blazing sun for an extended period of time with their eyes. Although Su Zimo could stare at the blazing sun after unlocking his 7 orifices, if he wanted to make use of the power of the sun to cultivate his eyes, it would be akin to setting himself on fire. Initially, I did not intend to impart this visual technique to you. The cultivation of this visual technique is indeed extremely dangerous. If you're not careful, one of your eyes will go blind. The red-headed ghost picked up the illumination stone on the ground and handed it back to Su Zimo. However, I discovered this on you. With the illumination stone, you'll definitely be able to cultivate this visual technique with twice the results with half the effort, and the success rate is extremely high. When he heard that, Su Zimo gradually understood. This visual technique was comprehended by an expert through the illumination stone in the past. Now that he had the illumination stone, it would be much easier for him to cultivate this visual technique, and the risks would be greatly reduced as well. Su Zimo received the illumination stone. Just like before, the white stone that was the size of a goose egg vanished once more. Immediately after, he felt a sharp pain in his head and his right eye turned milky white in a strange manner. A moment later, it returned to normal. The blazing sun above our heads is formed from a trace of the power of the illumination stone. If you cultivate with the blazing sun, you can nurture the power of the utmost yang in your eyes. The red-headed ghost said in a deep voice, "Once that power is released, it will incinerate and destroy everything." In reality, Su Zimo could imagine the might of this visual technique even without the red-headed ghost's explanation. Under normal circumstances, demons would have to advance to nascent soul realm and cultivate an essence spirit if they wanted to make use of the sun and moon to cultivate and absorb their essence. But now, he had just formed his inner core. In other words, he had already come into contact with an even higher level of power in the realm of his inner core. Cultivate this visual technique to its limits, hee. The red-headed ghost laughed strangely. One of your eyes will turn into another blazing sun. Pest. Su Zimo took in a breath of cold air. There was a blazing sun hidden in his eye socket. The blazing sun appeared the moment he opened his eyes. Even emperors wouldn't be able to withstand that power, right? Immediately after, Su Zimo recalled his initial doubt. Cultivating with the blazing sun without any spirit chi did not seem like a cultivation technique of the human race. Instead, it seemed more like a cultivation technique of fiend demons. Suddenly, Su Zimo asked, "Red-headed ghost, this visual technique isn't a secret skill of the human race, right? Why do you care so much? Even if it's a secret skill of the demon race, are you going to cultivate it or not?" The red-headed ghost rolled his eyes and sneered, "You're about to cultivate into a true fiend demon yourself. Why do you care so much?" Su Zimo replied indifferently, "Although I'm cultivating as a demon, I'm not a demon." Hee. The red-headed ghost grinned. "Your human gene Dan is already crippled and there's only a single inner core left in your body. Who's going to believe that you're a human?" Su Zimo remained silent. A moment later, Su Zimo asked in a seemingly casual manner, "What's the name of this visual technique?" The red-headed ghost raised his brow and glared at Su Zimo meaningfully. As though he had seen through the latter's intentions, he chuckled. "Let's call it Illumination Eye then." Old fox. Su Zimo cursed internally. He had already vaguely sensed that there was something strange about the red-headed ghost's identity. Just now, he was merely asking because he wanted to deduce something from the name of the visual technique. To think that the red-headed ghost would be watertight. Illumination I. It was clear that it was just a name. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.